Hey, everyone, I am live. And I guess I did StreamYard wrong and it automatically set me for Monday, but this is a Sunday night live show. Um, hey, Terrence, let me know if you want to join in. I don't have a big plan for what I'm doing, so I'd be happy to just randomly chat. But I know it's very late most people's time, so um, but anyway, I thought I would do a haul of a couple of different things. Um, just because I felt like doing it, I guess. Partially maybe because I enjoyed watching Terrence's live show a little while ago where he did the second part of his top 20, or not top 20, top five, top comics from his 500 comics that he read so far this year. Great video. I suppose I'll add a link later just in case anyone wants to go check that out, or you can just go to the Comic Crack channel and it'll be the most recent video. Yeah, it's very late your time there, Terrence. Scott Connor, if you wanted to hop on, I'd be happy to send you a link. But again, I understand it's even later for Scott, man. Let's see, what time would it be your time? 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning? I'm not sure. So you can see I have here the only what's the proper term for a special variant. This is the Comics with Bueller variant cover. It's the first and perhaps the only time maybe if Bob or Bueller does it again, it's the first time I've ever gotten one of these exclusive variants. That's the term. And I've never, Ryan, if you wanted to jump on, but are you usually at work at this time, or maybe not on a Sunday night? So what? Yeah. So first and perhaps only time I did it, just because Bueller's kind of a friend, or is a friend, and I just thought it was fun, and I like the cover. So I got that for Moon Knight #1, which I've already read, and decided I would not continue following Moon Knight. But anyway, that was a first for me. Not that exciting of a thing, but there you go. And I thought I would show these Perry Rhodan covers because I really dig the Perry Rhodan is probably I know it's horribly written in English anyway, but I love collecting it probably for childhood nostalgia and the covers by Gray Morrow that just seem to represent some old-fashioned view of science fiction, a view of science fiction that might have been kind of old-fashioned even in the 70s when these were being published in the United States. I had a subscription to this book magazine, as they tried to sell it as when I was a kid. Let's see. I need to. Yep, Brian's about to go to sleep. Most of my audience will be asleep while I'm doing this, but anyway, what the heck. So I particularly like that cover. Did I already have that cover? I don't know. That one looks familiar. So I have all of these in the book version of the CLZ app, but it does not work nearly as well as the comic book CLZ. So it's actually still hard for me to keep track of which of these Perry Rhodans I've got so far. I do hate that they have stickers on them. So now this one's coming off pretty easily, but I bet it's pulling stuff off the cover. So, I mean, I'm not looking for mint condition Perry Rhodans, but I like that. That's kind of cool. What am I doing? I should make the image bigger and me smaller. There we go. Now you get a better view of what these are like. Yeah. Oh, Scott is up for coming on. So just give me a second, Scott. I will send you a link on Twitter. Scott and I have talked a lot on Twitter and via the YouTubes that he's on, in comments, basically. This will be our first face-to-face if he is up for it, if I'm understanding correctly. So there's the link, Scott. Feel free to jump on and feel free to jump off when you've had enough. So there's some more Perry Rhodan. I've been collecting these for so long, you'd think I'd have all of them, but I still have a lot to go. Unknown Sector, Milky Way, Dead Live. I think Clark Darlton is a pseudonym for one of the other authors who also uses his real name. I don't know if it's Kurt Marr or someone else. Hey, Scott.
Hi.
Let me go to a shot. Am I hearing myself in the background there?
Don't know.
Some other voices, maybe? Is someone watching TV, maybe? Oh, I am hearing myself.
Yeah, I'm getting an echo.
So weird. Maybe I'm open in some tab somewhere.
Do you have more than one tab open?
Me? No, and because I have headphones on, there shouldn't be any feedback coming from me. You don't have my video on or unmuted?
Yeah, I see the video.
I mean, the video on YouTube. Do you have a YouTube tab?
Oh, that's probably why. Good Lord. Hold on. Let me.
It's late.
Yeah, that's why. Duh.
Chris, if you want to come on. Comic Cracks, happy to see you, Scott.
Me and my messy hair
Comics.
Jumped in the shower and didn't comb it afterwards and just put it in the ponytail.
Well, in the quality of video that we get here, it doesn't really matter what we look
The Perry Rhodan paperbacks that you have there.
Mm-hmm.
I have several of those myself, and I also have an earlier printing incarnation of those where he's doing them in a chapbook form.
Oh, really? I've never seen those.
They were all what's the word I'm looking for? They're all translated from German by Forey Ackerman and his wife Wendy.
Right, and that's the case of this version too. Sure. Forey Ackerman was the editor, and his wife, what is his wife's name? Wendeline or something like that.
Wendy, I think.
Wendy
Ann.
Gotcha. Wendy Ann, that's it. Wendy Ann Ackerman. Yeah, and I think there would always be like somewhere that
the paper books
editorial.
Yeah, do they have Gray Morrow illustrations in them?
I'm not sure on the inside, but the covers are all Gray Morrow.
Okay.
Oh, here's maybe that's Gray Morrow too.
Yeah,
it's hard for me to tell if it's not like his comic book style.
Did you know that it's the longest running science fiction franchise in the world?
I did know, and there's something about just that concept of the longest
running one. If I'm not mistaken, there's over 3,000 publications they're up to so far.
Yeah, it might be. I think, is it weekly in Germany?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the
and they're really novellas.
Schedule.
So they had to pad them out with a lot of backup.
And the vast majority of them are still not available in English.
Right. Well, I read that the publisher of Ace hated them, so eventually pulled the plug on it. But it could also be that sales weren't that good, which would make more
sales
sense.
Usually tend to be the big factor.
Right. But maybe when it's marginal, like their
right.
sales are okay but not great, then perhaps the editor-in-chief's opinion might count. It might have been Donald Walheim, who later started Daw Books, who was the publisher / editor at Ace at this point.
Sure. I always like those. I want to get more of them and eventually read more of them as well.
Well, I love the concept of it. This endless story that keeps expanding out, like the Perry Rhodan's empire keeps expanding out further and further.
Pretty much the epitome of space opera, really.
Right. He's the ultimate Captain Kirk alpha male.
Pretty much. That's true.
But whenever I try reading them, as a kid, I love them. But when I try reading them as an adult, I kind of struggle with, I don't know, there's kind of a clumsiness to it.
It's not exactly Shakespeare.
It's far from Shakespeare.
It's fun, but it's not Shakespeare.
We've got Jack Yo here from some late night stargazing. I wonder if Jack's kind of out in the country and doesn't suffer from light pollution the way I do. And Fargate, hello, Mr. Fargate. Good to see you.
I live in the suburbs, but I do live far enough from town where I really don't have light pollution here either.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
nice, nice.
which is nice because it's only 3 miles, something like that.
Yeah, the only time I really saw the sky well, when I was in the southern hemisphere,
Mhm.
and I was out on a farm in Brazil, and I went out at night, and suddenly I looked up at the sky, and I suddenly realized, oh, that's why they call it the Milky Way.
Right.
And I don't know if you can see the Milky Way better from the southern hemisphere. It's just that I was so far from civilization there.
When I was visiting Calgary in Canada in the summer, it didn't get dark there till about midnight.
Wow.
So, you didn't really get to see as much of the sky as you usually do, where I live, or
Right.
the night sky rather. It's interesting. It's weird getting used to being able to play baseball at 11 p.m. at night in full bright sunlight.
Yeah.
It's like, this is odd. I like it, but it's strange.
Yeah. It's kind of cool to have so much daylight, but I guess perhaps wearing at the same time.
Conversely, in the winter, it's dark all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Which on some days it sounds great to me to have almost nonstop darkness, but I suppose that would also be bad after a while. Sorry.
There was either another YouTube video or a podcast or something where a guy was really mad that the other people doing the podcast didn't know more about Perry Rhodan.
Oh, really?
And I was like one of the guys that did. I explained, hey, I know what Perry Rhodan is. We're not all ignorant savages outside of Germany. But he got all ticked off that we didn't know about it. So.
And what I've seen of the German covers, that's really cool art too. A different style, but
right.
It might be fun to collect a few of those just for the covers.
I wonder if there are people that collect those just for the cover art.
Yeah. Well, I'm essentially collecting these because I'm a Gray Morrow fan.
Gotcha.
And I don't really expect to read all of them, but I want to own all of them. I think there might have been like 109 or so before they gave up. Oh, look, there's one on the...
Were there certain series that you collected when you were a kid?
Well, yeah. So this fascinated me when I was a kid.
Okay.
And like there's that all these mutants with mutant powers and stuff, so it kind of tied into that whole X-Men kind of thing. And
gotcha.
And I love the idea of a story that never ended. That really appealed to me. As an adult, I kind of like stories that end more, but as a kid.
Yeah, it seems like just about all the big fantasy series these days don't seem like they're ever going to end.
Right. And it's probably driven by kids who like, well, and some adults, of course, who like the idea that it never ends. So, oops, they don't do it in this one. So one thing they did in a lot of the ones when I was reading them as a kid is at the end of each chapter, maybe it's only in the earlier issues. Let me see if I can find one. At the end of the chapter, they would tell you something that's going to happen in the future. Like here, 50 adventures from now, it's all-out action at Blockade Lepsa.
So they would give you excerpt of
the. They would give you a title from the future.
Gotcha.
And
I have about 10 of those, I think.
Yeah. 100 adventures from now, you'll hunt big game with Bawana Pucky. And I think they had a lot of spin-offs, right? They had Atlan, this character Atlan got his own series, and I think there were some others.
Gotcha.
So it's just amazing. Nothing like that ever happened in American publishing. Thousands of
Did you ever read Dan Dare?
No, I have a Dan Dare, a hardback of Dan Dare comics, which I got sometime this year and haven't really dug into yet. What made you think of him?
I have a whole bunch of them I haven't gone through yet.
And he's a British from like a British comics, right?
Yeah, it's a British. He's kind of like the British equivalent of Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers, but moved up in what you consider to be, I guess, the 1950s time frame.
Right. And for a while, was he drawn by that artist who did Storm?
Yeah, Frank Hampson.
Okay. Yeah, I need to look into that more.
Yeah, I've got a really good history of Dan Dare book that's sitting about 3 feet behind me right now.
Huh.
Gives all kinds of gory detail about all the various artists that worked on it, and how it was developed, and all that good stuff.
So when did you first start reading science fiction? Because I know you've read a lot of science fiction.
Probably around the age of 7 or 8 or so.
Do you remember what early books?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well,
your
it wasn't
attention?
science fiction, but I remember reading The Hobbit when I was 7 years old.
Oh, really? Okay.
A friend of mine had mentioned it at school, and I said, "Oh, this sounds pretty good. I need to check it out." I'm like, hey, this is kind of neat. One of the first science, and I still love these books today, and they've got kind of a cult following. There were 2 series of books that came out probably in the late 70s. Around the Star Wars was an impetus for a lot of these things to happen.
Right.
One series was called the Terran Trade Authority, and the other series was called Galactic Encounters. And basically what they were hardcovers that were art books, but the stories were written around the art. So you'd have all kinds of classic science fiction illustrators like Chris Voss and Peter Elson and Angus McKee.
And they were doing novels based around the cover art?
They take pre-existing art that had been done for novels or other projects, look at the art, and then make a story based on the art that has already been generated.
Nice.
They're kind of like, if you would think of it, this is kind of like National Geographic in space. Where you visit different planets and they go over the different flora and fauna that live on the planets and things that happen and the various wars that happen between the different governments and things like that. I love those books as a kid, and I still like them now.
Well, I know in the 40s pulp, occasionally, if a writer was visiting the editor at the office, they might show him a new painting and say,
right,
try writing a story based around that. And sometimes they would have several different authors write stories based around the same painting. I always thought that sounded fun.
I always thought it was always funny, too. A lot of the pulp stories in one particular magazine could be 90% by the same guy, but he's using 4 different pen names.
Right. Yeah, there were certain people who just pumped it out. I think Robert Heinlein was one of them who would often have 3 or 4 stories.
A lot of the guys got
in the same
started
thing.
off in the pulp magazines, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then when did you discover comics? Do you remember what your early comics were?
One of the first comics I can remember, I'd had to have been 4 or 5 years old, somewhere in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
My mother took me over, and she was going to college and working. Well, she was out of college by then, but she was working. She took me to babysitter one day, and it was a different babysitter than normal. And there were some other kids there, and they had some comics, which I had really not seen to a great degree. I'd seen a few. And I didn't know it at the time, but what they had was Sea Devils by Russ Heath. So that's
cool. First
ones I saw. Of course, I didn't know what it was then. And later I realized, hey, that's what it was. I really liked the Treasury-sized comics that I got when I was a kid. So like the Treasury-sized Spider-Man with Romita cover, the Batman Treasury-sized comics. There was one with the Fantastic Four, which I always thought was cool because it had a cutaway diagram of the Baxter Building and showed you all the different components inside the building. I always loved that. It was great. The first ones that I bought with my own money that somebody else didn't buy for me were Star Wars and Micronauts and Shogun Warriors. So that would have been in 77, 78, somewhere through there.
How old were you when Star Wars came out?
I was a month shy of being 9 years old.
Okay.
So it's perfect age to see that movie.
Yes, perfect. And I was 14 or 15, so I'm about
literally had never
6 years
seen
older.
anything like that before, and probably drove my mom crazy talking about it incessantly after that. I do remember like it was yesterday that we got the Treasury-sized edition. There was 2 Star Wars Treasury editions.
I forgot about that.
And do you remember a convenience store chain called 7-Eleven.
Yeah, and we still have
not 7-Eleven. Good grief! It was a Hop-In was the name of it.
Hop-In? No, I don't think we had that where I was.
It's regional or semi-regional, but it had a little bunny. They're not around anymore.
I don't recall that, so I don't think.
Kind of like a 7-Eleven now. Okay. Stopped at a Hop-In one day. I just probably stopped there to get gas, imagine. And they had a big magazine rack, and I looked. I was like, "Oh, look at that! Shining like the Holy Grail." It's an oversized John Star Wars comic, and my eyes probably got Mom.
Was that drawn by Al Williamson?
No, those were drawn by Howard Chaykin.
Oh, the Howard Chaykin ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were actually just adaptations of the first 3 issues of the series. No, the first 6 issues. Sorry, they were split up in 3 of the 2 consecutive books. They were done by Howard Chaykin and Roy Thomas.
Ah, okay. For some reason, I thought Al Williamson was in on the first Star Wars.
No, Al Williamson did
maybe
do
later.
The Empire Strikes Back.
Empire Strikes Back. Okay.
And it's pretty damn good. I've got a archive edition, or not a artist edition of that. Big Al Williamson fan.
And have you? Have you like dropped out of comics and come back in, or have you always?
I just don't have the budget for it right now.
Right. Well, I know right now you don't have the budget. Yeah. But obviously you're in comics at the moment because you're on people's comic book hangouts and stuff.
I probably stopped reading comics when I was about 15, 16, roughly.
Uh-huh.
Got back into it again my first year of college. So I was only out of it for about 5-6 years.
That was exactly my spot. Well, someone else knows Hop-In.
Yeah.
Bought many a comic from the spinner rack of my local one. So I got most of my comics at a drugstore chain called Rexall. And they seem to be
I remember the Rexall
a consistent place for me to find comics.
I think Rexall was pretty much all around the country.
I imagine so.
National.
I haven't seen it in a long time, but
I also remember, as being a kid too, there was another drugstore that I got a lot of things from over the years, including my first issue of Savage Sword of Conan.
Nice.
Was another tiny little drugstore. It also had like a general store kind of attached to it. But I actually remember the first issue of Savage Sword of Conan I bought just because, like, well, this is different. It's instead of shaped like a comic, it was shaped like a magazine. It was a magazine, basically. Like,
well, you must have been even younger then. I think that came out before Star Wars. If I'm remembering correctly.
I really don't know. I'm not sure.
I'll have to double check that, but I think it might have come out a year or 2 before Star Wars. So
you
were
this was not an early issue of Savage Sword. This was,
I thought you said it was the first. It was your first.
My first copy of the line.
Yeah. Yeah, luckily my dad didn't look too closely at the Savage Sword of Conan's, but he found my heavy metals and he threw them all away.
Yeah, I didn't get a heavy metal until years later, and I actually was lucky because I got a really cheap copy of number 1, which is in almost pristine condition. Or I can't even talk today.
Pristine mint condition.
Pristine mint condition. Thank you.
Nice.
I think I paid like $12 for that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I mean, I got a real bargain on that one. Then,
I think the ones from the first year are a little bit expensive.
Another friend of mine was moving to England, and she gave me like a whole box full of heavy metals, and there's probably 40 or 50 of them in there.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So sometimes you stumble across stuff, and other times you pay through the nose for it. So.
And from my discussions with you, it seems like your favorites are people who, in my mind, are very fine illustrators. They could do comics, but you could also picture them.
Yeah, my favorite
doing the really nice book covers or something.
Come from that background of studying book illustrators, basically.
Yeah. So
Mike Kaluta, Charles Vess, Mark Schultz.
Right. And is Mark Schultz your current favorite?
Or
it's probably hard to pick just one.
I have about 7 or 8 favorites, but if I had to pick just one, if somebody put a gun to my head, I'd probably have to go with Mark, just because I think he's one of the best renderers that has ever worked in the business, and that's including. I'm going to make a bold statement. The artwork in the last 2 issues of Xenozoic Tales, I think, are 13 and 14, and these have been, close to 30 years ago or so now. is some of the best rendering that's ever been done by anybody. As far as I'm concerned, it's as good as Frank Frazetta level work at that point.
Definitely what I've seen, like in his more recent sketchbooks that I got recently, he seems right up there with a Frazetta level. I don't know if I'd say
he's using
better.
he's using a slightly different technique now. Back then, he was just strictly pen and ink.
Right.
Now he's using what are called wolf pencils, which are carbon pencils. They're gives a little more fuzzy quality, for lack of a better word, but it's still pretty ridiculously rendered.
Right, but then that fuzziness gives it a little bit of a painterly quality, I guess.
Somewhat, yeah.
Well, and guys like that, I think, can make too much by selling their sketches and stuff, so they don't need to do comics anymore.
Well, Mark also writes the Sunday Prince Valiant strip, which Tom Yates is drawing it now.
Right.
He's been doing that for a while now.
Yeah, and he did a lot of writing for DC.
He did for a while.
52, I think.
Yeah, he wrote some Superman things, wrote some Flash things. He wrote some Predator things for Dark Horse, which is kind of odd considering him.
Considering him, what do you mean by that? That he's not?
It's not. Predator is not. If you think of Mark Schultz, the first thing that pops in your head is not the Predator.
Right.
But he's
more on the art level. He's more of a romantic, you might say.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
With the more idealized view of.
Have you seen his Conan illustrations?
I think there were some in the sketchbook I got. I wish I could just reach over and grab all my.
You're not like Earl Grey. You have everything in.
I'm not like Earl Grey. They're scattered all over the house.
It's like an octopus in an art museum. Let me just pull this back here. has a particular version that's nicer than anything we have in the United States.
In the Roger Zelazny Amber books, in the second series, which is about Merlin, the son of Corwin, he has some magical ability to reach through the different worlds and grab any tool he needs. And that's what I was thinking of with Earl Grey, able to just.
He must have a pocket dimension somewhere. He just pulls things out, like Snoopy's doghouse.
Yeah,
like Snoopy's doghouse. It's bigger on the inside.
I love Snoopy's doghouse. I want to go in there.
I actually got to meet Roger Zelazny
Oh, really?
Small local convention, probably about a year or two before he passed away.
Oh, wow. I'm jealous. I never met him. He's one of my favorite writers.
Yeah, he was a really nice guy. Unfortunately, I didn't know as much about his work back then as I do now. If I had it to do over again, I would have been able to ask much better questions than I did.
Yeah, they tried to do a comic book of the Amber books, but I can't remember why, but I remember at the time I just thought this just isn't right. It doesn't feel
Seems like
right.
I remember a house ad for those.
Yeah, I think maybe Marvel did it. I'm not sure.
I think it was a smaller I could be wrong.
Yeah, it could be. I really don't remember accurately, but anyway, it didn't go anywhere, which is too bad because I think it would make a great comic in the right hands.
Well, they did make an Amber role-playing game.
Yeah, and I have not tried that, but that should make a good role-playing game, I would think. But I'm not much of a role-playing game. I don't have much role-playing game knowledge.
Well, that's the problem. See, I collect that kind of stuff too, so I have far more things I'm interested in than time, space, and money for even 10%.
Right. Well, I definitely need a bigger house for what I want to collect.
It all fits in the house. It's just never enough time and money.
Right.
For all of it.
Well,
especially once you start getting like Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard, and then you start tracking down like fanzines of those. There's lots, and especially for Burroughs, lots and lots of them. And unless you're a multimillionaire, you'll never be able to afford them all.
Yeah, fanzines are very expensive on eBay and wherever else.
They can vary. Yeah, I mean they can be really expensive, and then sometimes you'll pick some up that are a lot cheaper than you expected as well.
Right.
So prices on that, this is true of Heavy Metal magazine too. Prices seem to be all over the place.
That's true.
Sometimes they're dirt cheap, and other times you're like, you want how much for that? Really? I don't think so.
Yeah, well, at one point I made a concerted effort on eBay to buy more obscure fanzines, and it wasn't cheap. Like I was trying to find those. There were a bunch of Texas fans who did these strip zines, and including scripts by people like George R.R. Martin and
Was
Jim
this just
Starlin
general,
artwork and stuff.
general comic scenes, or?
So, well, I don't know if I got the parlance right, but I thought, in the world of fanzines back in the day, I mean, I mostly knew them in the 70s, certain fanzines had amateur comic strips in them,
Okay,
or
gotcha.
comic book stories, and they were called strip zines. And some of the people who became pros came out of there.
Oh yeah.
I know one of the earliest ones I had, which was it was a ditto kind of thing. And so the artist had to draw it on those blue pages.
Yeah,
And the
the
artist was
reproduction on those were terrible.
Yeah. The artist was Brent Anderson.
Gotcha.
And only a few years later, I started seeing him, on Kazar.
I don't have any of them, but there was a fanzine called APA Plus or APA something. And a lot of people that did end up working comics later started off there, like Frank Miller, Paul Chadwick, some fairly big names, started off that way.
Yeah, I mean, you never know who you find, but a lot of things just went into obscurity also. So I've got this one here, actually, that I found at a comic book store recently.
I like
called
the title.
Hot Damn. And it's not bad. But I don't
Who did
think
the cover on that?
Yeah. I don't think any of these people. The cover artist is Brian Frost.
Okay, that's not somebody I'm familiar with. I was just curious.
And let's see, does it say who the publisher was? Someone named Michael Harris in Kent, England. So this is a British one. Although they were also distributed by someone in Idaho. And a single issue cost 3 shillings or 40 cents. So, and this is almost at the level of one of those cheaper bad horror comics of the black and white days. Let's see, but it's probably the strongest one in the magazine.
Do you have what are called prozines, which are basically that type of thing with a lot better production value?
I do have some of those. I mean, again, not near me on my magic shelves.
I have several, but not.
Yeah. I have some, I have ones. There were some that were even published by Rich Buckler or by friends of his, and every issue would have something by Rich Buckler, but then by other people who are kind of Rich Buckler wannabes. I'm assuming
that's an odd phrase. Rich Buckler wannabe.
Well, I'm just calling them that. I don't. They had similar but not quite successful styles to Rich Buckler.
I met Rich Buckler at Heroes Con many years ago, and I've got a little comic book that was done by him. I think Stan Lee had a blurb in it, was how to draw like Rich Buckler. Of course, if you know anything about Rich Buckler, the art of drawing like Rich Buckler is to trace it.
Well, Rich Buckler had many styles, and I think like if you catch him on like the Atlas comic he did one issue of called Demon Hunter, that was his own creation. Okay. I think there you see what was at the time his real style, which was kind of a cross between Neil Adams and a little bit of Jack Kirby and a little bit of Jim Steranko.
Okay. It's also kind of jarring to see some artists that draw in a very certain style you're used to, and if they draw outside that style, it looks odd.
Yeah.
I've seen a drawing by Sergio Aragonis that's not done in his regular cartoony style at all.
Oh, really? I haven't seen
Sergio?
that.
Really? Yeah. And then also Fred Hembeck.
Oh, really?
You're expecting the squiggles on the knees and the elbows, and when you see draw something realistic, it's like, well, that doesn't look like Fred at all. It's kind of fun to see that sometimes.
And for some reason, because I read a bunch of these as a kid, I get fascinated by this sort of amateur comics. I have so I was willing to. I don't think I paid a lot for this one actually, but I have paid up to like $30 or $40 for some of these things, and
some
that was not a good investment.
Prozines that were done back in the late '60s and early '70s that have work by like the 4 Studio guys and Frank Bruner,
right.
Craig Russell, things like that. Some of those can get a little pricey.
Yeah, but I'd like to find the old, the dittoed ones, like with the Brent. Mm-hmm. All of that stuff got thrown away by my parents, probably when I went off to college, or maybe even before. I've also done a big haul of Tower of Shadows recently. Oops.
Who's the artist on that one?
I think it's a variety of. I don't know who the artist on the cover is. I think it might be. Oh, it says Ramita. It doesn't look like Ramita.
I've seen that cover before.
I think there might be. I think this was a horror one where they actually did original horror in the late '60s. Yeah, there's the. This is a Sterenko one, and I think Sterenko may have colored it himself too.
That's definitely a Sterenko layout. Look at those panel lines. Yeah.
They don't credit the colors. But
you don't see many guys doing panels like that today.
No, not at all. And I really think they should think about doing more interesting experiments with panels.
I agree.
These days. This one is Johnny Craig, who I think was he an EC guy?
Yeah, he was.
And he wrote and drew this. So it looks a lot like John Romita here to me.
Sort of. I can see that.
This is the first I've opened this. And here's one by Stan Lee and John Buscema with Don Heck inking.
Gotcha.
Hey, Sam.
Hello.
Sam from Sam's Tangled Web is here.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I really didn't have much appreciation for horror comics, but I like them now. Same thing with Westerns, too. I really didn't care for those when I was a kid.
Yeah, I liked the kind of horror that was the serialized horror, but I didn't care for these short stories at the time.
That one panel in the top,
this one,
the leftmost page, yeah, that panel there, that almost reminds me of Steve Ditko.
You're right. It is John Buscema, and I can see some of the ways that he drew the face, but the layout of the panel seems very Steve Ditko.
I think it's the floating planets and
things
that look like Ditko.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think this might be pretty early in Buscema's time at Marvel. I feel like, Buscema, not that he got lazy, but he got less experimental as he moved on through his career.
I would imagine the first Buscema I ever saw was working on Savage Sword of Conan.
Ah, yeah. And in Savage Sword of Conan, they just had amazing inkers over Buscema's work.
Yeah. I can pretty well tell that was the first place I ever saw Alfredo Alcala as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I read in an introduction by Roy Thomas that Buscema couldn't stand Alcala's inks. But everyone else, of course, loved them.
Yeah.
But when you see Buscema's own inks on his Conan, it looks very Prince Valiant-ish, with less detail. But I think he tries to ink kind of the way Hal Foster inked.
Hal Foster influenced so many people back then. Oh, Paolo's joined us too.
Hey, Paolo. What is it? Must be breakfast time where Paolo is.
Having a regular party.
And there's 64-page special, old buddy of mine. Never seen his face, but
talking about Buscema and Roy Thomas, there's a 2-book series, and I think there's going to be a 3rd book if the 3rd one's not already out. It's about basically Roy Thomas's entire career involving Robert E. Howard characters.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's called My Barbarian Life, if I'm not mistaken.
He may already. I think there's multiple volumes.
I think there's going to be 3, or if they're not already 3 already.
I think I got Kindle editions of something where he goes issue by issue through all the Conan.
Gotcha.
Comics.
It's something I want to read. I just haven't got them yet.
Yeah, I didn't know if it would be worth getting in hardcover, so I just got a Kindle edition.
Right.
So here, let me show you. Tower of Shadows number 2.
Like the blob in the background there is kind of neat.
Yeah, kind of. Whoops, let me. Sorry, I'm going to get rid of 64-page special. Is there a signature on the cover here? It's also by Romita.
Nice.
I appreciate Romita a lot more now than when I was a kid. I kind of took him for granted at the time, I think. And this is Don Heck. See, there are times when Don Heck isn't doing superheroes, his stuff looks quite good.
Yeah, Don Heck kind of does have a reputation for not being the finest artist around.
Yeah. Although, I hated Don Heck as a kid because it would be a Kirby cover, and then inside it would be Don Heck art. I think if the cover hadn't...
That was one of the disappointing things about the Gold Key titles, too, is you only had these really great painted covers.
Yeah.
And the interiors never live up to them.
Right. And they weren't as bad interiors as I thought they were as a kid, but that cover created such an expectation.
Exactly.
And here we have more John Buscema. So anyway, I thought these were fun.
Paolo said he saw some Don Heck romance comics the other day that looked nice.
Yeah, I think he is really good at the romance. And I thought he did some good... sometime in the 70s, he switched to DC and did Wonder Woman, and I thought he was good on her.
I didn't know that.
Terrence saying these are going to go on the list. So it took me a while to figure out which of the Marvel horror comics actually had original stories in them rather than reprints. Because most of the ones from the late 60s, early 70s have reprints. But Tower of Shadows is full of original material, at least up to a point.
I really like the cover on that. I like the monster on it.
I'm sorry?
I said I really like the monster on the cover on that.
Yeah, it almost looks like burning embers or something.
Sort of. I like it.
I don't know if there is a collected edition of Tower of Shadows. They have been collecting a little bit.
Ever hearing a mention of it?
Yeah. Just recently, they've been doing some of the horror anthologies as omnibuses. So maybe they'll eventually get to this. Every editor had Heck rush his art while doing superheroes. So maybe they would bring Heck in as the guy who could do it quickly. Worse, Heck looks better when he inks himself. I'll agree with that. Heck is quite a good inker. And they were always giving him Tuska or Chick Stone as inkers. Chick seemed good on Kirby to me, but
remember the Ross's show earlier you're talking about Wally Wood inking over Steve Ditko.
Yeah. And
Wally Wood is such a powerful inker, he's going to overpower just about anybody else.
Yeah. I like it, even though they're overpowering.
Right. I like Wally Wood's art better, and I like Steve Ditko's.
Well, that makes sense with your preference for
but you can't go wrong with either
classic
one.
Illustration. I like them both. Ditko has different phases. I like some Ditko phases better than others.
Well, the first time I ever saw Steve Ditko, other than the Marvel Treasury reprint of Spider-Man, was he's working on some Micronaut stuff. I think the annuals, and it was not his best work by a long shot. So I remember seeing that as a kid. I was like, I'm not so sure I like this guy so much. Later on, it's a different story, but first exposure to Ditko was not so great for me.
Paulo's saying you can check the issues in the GCD. I can't figure out what the GCD is.
That's the Grand Comics database.
Oh, Grand Comics database. Okay. And is Paulo saying that he has contributed to that database by making a list of, or has he just used it to make his own?
I guess he's still on their mailing list. I used to be on it till I got so much mail that I couldn't go through it in a day.
You know what? I forgot to put Paulo's comment up here for everyone else to see. So, and now to my surprise, this one has a written and drawn by Neil Adams story here.
Wow, that does not look like the panel lines are not what you expect from Neil Adams.
Well, there was a period like when he was doing the X-Men with Roy Thomas, he did a lot of panels like that, I think.
Gotcha.
I think there was a period, when Steranko came along that Neil Adams was...
I was thinking the same thing. I wonder if there was a little Steranko influence that was creeping in there.
Yeah, I think he was trying to compete with Steranko in a sense.
Gotcha.
And I think they both left like hidden messages to each other in certain panels. I know there's one I think it's in a Neil Adams thing where if you look closely at the lines, it says a Sterenko effect at these lines shooting up through a panel somewhere.
Do you know the story of how Neil Adams put in Kaluda's name as a sound effect in one issue?
Oh no, I didn't know that. That's
I
a good
can't remember.
one.
I can't remember which issue it is. I can look it up, but it's not spelled properly. But for whatever reason, he just liked the way Mike Kaluda's name sounded, and he was running around the office all day just saying Kaluda, Kaluda, and he put it in as a sound effect in one issue. I can't remember which one it is.
I think that makes a good sound effect.
It was kind of funny. Did
Zesty.
anybody ever do better sound effects than? Oh gosh, the Mad Artist, Don Martin.
Don Martin. Those were good.
Oh my gosh, they're so fun. They're still this day. I mean, 5-year-old sense of humor, but they're still funny.
Yeah. You would think they could be reprinting Don Martin forever and selling them to endless generations of kids, but I don't see those.
From what I understand, the current incarnation of Mad is all reprints now.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
So I noticed it on the shelf at my comic book store. Like I bought the special Sergio issue.
So did I. That was because I think that was the last issue that was going to have new content.
There was a little bit of new Sergio in there. It wasn't there, yeah. But it
And
would be
of course-
nice if they did one like that for Don Martin.
Yeah, that's true. Now, did you see did you ever see the giant Don Martin box set that came out?
No, I didn't know about that.
It's a big 2-issue box set. Like, are you familiar with the Far Side and the Calvin and Hobbes box sets?
Yeah, I've seen them.
Okay, formatted like that.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Oh, nice.
Can't remember the
Probably out of print
I think
now,
The
I
publisher was Running Tree Press, but it was 2 big volumes, and it's all chock. I don't know if it's all of Don Martin's material, Mad, but it's a goodly chunk if it's not the entirety.
I mean, when I was a kid, he was their most popular artist. There were paperback books of him all over the place.
Yeah.
Don Martin drops 20 stories, and John Martin does this.
And
No
there's
first
another
name.
rabbit hole to go down collecting wise is Mad material.
Exactly, yeah.
There's so much of it, And I'll buy anything that's got Sergio in it. That's literally every issue of Mad after, he started working on it. So.
The first time I was aware of Wally Wood was over Garcia Lopez on that Hercules Unbound.
Yeah, I didn't even know about Wally Wood. Well, I didn't become aware of him until much later. Like I was probably, I was probably in my 30s before I even really started noticing Wally Wood.
Uh-huh. In Hercules Unbound, I remember one issue I got was drawn by Walt Simonson, and then another issue by Garcia Lopez, but they were both inked by Wally Wood. And that's where I started, my little 15-year-old brain started saying, what do these have in common here?
Connecting the dots, right?
But and then later I learned more about Wally Wood in all his other incarnations.
I think Wally might be the most diverse comics artist.
Certainly of his generation, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he's as diverse as Mobius or someone like that, but of the people sort of slaving away in the American comic book mills.
Mobius is a whole different universe almost into himself. Wally did everything. I mean, he did romance and war stories and horror and science fiction,
pornography,
fantasy, and probably some other genres that we don't know about yet.
Right. And he was a big experimenter in self-publishing, which I guess a few other people did that too, but he was pretty strong on that. I know Gil Kane tried a few times.
I just want to get that Wits End collection that Fantagraphics did a few years ago.
Yeah, I picked that up. I keep meaning to give it a more thorough read and then do a video about it.
That's another good example of a magazine where the prices are all over the place.
Yeah, you're right.
Anywhere from $5 up to $250.
And the same getting the original Mr. A by Steve Ditko. Sometimes you can find that real cheap, and other times it's very expensive.
Have you ever read any of those?
Yeah.
Did you like them?
You get bored of it pretty quickly.
It's pretty dense material.
But it's kind of the same message hammered in over and over again, I felt.
Right. It was a.
But I like looking at it. And
It
I
was,
kind of like that he has this strong philosophy behind
he
his work.
does, and I'm not a fan of philosophy at all. It's a subject that just I don't get along with it. There was a documentary video that came out on VHS, probably in the late '80s, I would guess, and it was hosted by Harlan Ellison.
Oh,
It's called Masters of Comic Art, but it had Steve Ditko, Dave Sim, Bernie Wrightson, Mobius,
did it have Wally
Bill
Wood?
Eisner. You can find it on YouTube now as well. I have the VHS. It's probably in a box somewhere in storage. Anyway, so they do little interviews with all the different creators. You get to see video footage of all of them except Steve Ditko. But
Right.
so Ditko, instead of seeing video footage, he is reading directly from Mr. A. And I just about fell asleep when he was reading it. I was like, oh,
You know, I've
gosh.
heard that audio. People have stolen the audio from that movie and put it in other videos that I've seen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can find the whole thing on YouTube now.
Yeah. Fargate is it big into Conan? Anyway,
I have most of the.
yeah, I think you can find that on YouTube.
I don't have it all, but I have about, I'd say about 80% of it. Those early issues are kind of pricey these days.
Of Conan? Yeah,
Yeah.
and apparently they've been going up a lot because of rumors of a TV show.
I know at one time, a few years ago, Amazon announced they were working on a Conan project, and then I think it went from Amazon to some other creative house. That's been in development hell for years.
I can't find a signature on this cover, and I can't really quite guess who did that. Maybe even Johnny Craig or something.
That could be a lot of people.
Ah, Gene Colan. I always am happy to find more Gene Colan. So, what was I going to say? I'm getting overheated. And have you at any point collected original art? I know you know some of the artists personally.
Yes, I have. Unfortunately, I had to sell it. I had an original Sandman page that was done by Mark Hempel, and got it at Heroes Con. I think I paid $250 for it at the time. It was one of the best. I mean, thematically, it was one of the best pages in the entire series. It was the page where he makes the decision to go and meet the kindly ones face to face.
Oh, wow.
And then I got sick and missed a whole bunch of work. I had to sell that.
Oh, that's
I sold it for a lot more than I paid for it, I'll tell you that.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. I kind of regret selling it now because, with the TV series coming up, if the value on the original art starts going through the roof, I'll kind of regret selling it. But
what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? I had a Tony Harris page, Starman page as well. I think back then he was only charging, I think, like $50 a page at the convention.
Oh, no.
Nowadays it'd be 10 times that much.
Right. I don't think even a cheaper artist is probably usually about $200 to start with.
I don't really have a lot of other original art pages, actual comic pages, but I have a whole lot of sketches.
Mm-hmm.
Todd Templeton did a really nice ambush book sketch. It's kind of funny.
Do you have any Charles Vest? Because I
do.
You mention his name a lot.
I have a Charles Vest Sandman sketch, and also have an original Mike Kaluta Sandman sketch.
How old is Charles Vest?
60s, in his 67, 68, somewhere.
Okay, so he still could have some productive decade or
more.
Yeah,
his birthday is just a few days away from mine, but it's either 67 or 68, one of the two.
This one's drawn by George Tuska. It doesn't look bad. I used to hate George Tuska as a kid, but maybe he's better.
I think actually when I was a kid, I wouldn't have known George Tuska from George Costanza. Yeah.
He was drawn when I was paying attention as a young teen. He was drawing a lot of things like Iron Man and
One
Luke
of the
Cage.
one of the first artists I actually paid attention to. This is one of the first comics I ever got. Was John Byrne did a series for Charlton. It was post-apocalyptic series
The
called
Doomsday something.
+1.
Right. That
Yeah.
I thought that I remember stumbling across that, like
They
just
used
one
to-
issue back then, and
Yeah,
thought
they
it
used
was
to
really cool.
sell local grocery store had distribution where they had bagged 3-issue sets. You can flip it over. You can see you could see 2 issues, but you couldn't see what the one in the middle was.
The third one, right?
Several issues of Doomsday +1 like that, and discovering it. It's like I remember reading through one of them. It was like there was a robot at the end. I was like, "Hey, this is pretty neat." So that was really, really early in John Byrne's career.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Dark of Night stuff is even a lot of Charles Vess fans don't know that exists.
I'll have to try to remember that. Yeah, because
Yeah,
I don't know.
it was early stuff in his career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I first saw Charles Vess. It might have been in Epic or something like that. Could it be that he was in there?
Yeah, he did do some work in it that was published in Epic. He sure did.
Hey, it's Jean Paul Ace Peter. Sean,
It
haven't
was
seen
in
him in a
black
while.
and white as well.
Jean Paul Ace Peter, one of the early YouTubers, been around a long time. Really nice guy.
I've heard Howard Mouse mention his name quite a few times.
Yes, or as we like to call him, GPAP. Sounds like some kind of medical process.
Yeah, it's not a CPAP machine; it's a GPAP machine.
Terrence, I think, is saying that Book of Night came out in 1979, so it must be reprinted by Dark Horse.
It was reprinted.
He was on Star. I think he was the one on
Starstruck was done by Michael Kaluta.
Oh, Kaluta. Yeah.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think Charles may have inked a couple of things here and there that Kaluta was working on, because they used to be roommates together in New York City back around the time in '79 or so.
Did Vess do some of that prosing work early in his career?
Some, but not as much as some of his contemporaries did more prosing work. Barry Windsor Smith did not much at all. Bernie Wrightson did quite a bit. Michael Kaluta did quite a bit. And there was another guy they went to art school with, whose name was Stephen Hickman.
I remember him. He did a lot of sci-fi illustrations.
Yeah, he passed away recently, which is a shame, because he was a really nice fellow. I'm sorry to hear that happened. But he went on to be a pretty famous science fiction book cover illustrator.
Yeah, yeah. I used to get what was it called? Rockets Blast or something.
Yeah,
like
RBCC.
That. And they would have the covers would be very professional looking.
Yes.
And a lot of those people, some of them went into comics, but a lot of them I think went into sci-fi illustration.
And there's another good example of a rabbit hole you can go down collecting, the RBCCs.
Yeah.
Some of those have some really good material in them.
Yeah, yeah. And I think somewhere in my boxes I've got a few of those.
Right.
Well, I remember thought I could remember the name of this artist I used to see everywhere. And I think he did comics for a short minute. Stephen Fabian, is that it?
Stephen Fabian is primarily, I don't know if he actually did any comics work, so to speak.
Maybe he just did covers of
he did
zines
work that was put in the fanzines, obviously, but he's primarily known as a science fiction and fantasy illustrator, and he's got a really interesting art style.
It's very pointillistic, kind of.
Yes, a lot of not exactly stippling like Virgil Finlay would do, but close.
Hey, Travis.
I like Stephen Fabian's art style a lot. He did a lot of work. I didn't realize this till later. He did a lot of work for TSR, the game company.
I started off the show showing off your cover, Travis, which I forgot when I was over your house to bring over so you could sign it for me. But anyway, maybe another day.
Is that the current incarnation of Moon Knight?
Yeah, this is issue number 1 of the current reboot, but this is a exclusive cover for the Comics with Bueller.
Okay, because the head
channels.
looks really odd.
Yeah, it's like I think it's like someone's mythical reimagining of Moon Knight.
Okay, gotcha.
And then on the inside,
Moon Knight into a mouse, or what?
On the inside, you have the various incarnations of Moon Knight showing up. I decided not to keep reading it. Maybe I'll check it out later in trade, but it didn't.
Oh wow, I haven't read Moon Knight in 25 years or more, I would imagine.
It seemed pretty competently done, but it just didn't immediately catch my attention.
Right.
Somehow with the writing. The art's kind of cool.
I just always think Moon Knight always reminded me of Batman.
Yeah. Although I have to go back and read his first appearances in Werewolf by Night, because I don't know if they were thinking of him as like Batman at the time. Because he was a mercenary hired to hunt the werewolf, I think. Anyway, here there is Barry Smith, speaking of those people from the studio. The terrible old man.
Must be about me.
Yes.
Wow, that does not. I mean, if you were just to show me that and say this is Barry Smith, I'm like, it is? Really?
Barry Smith was changing his style almost every issue.
Yeah, he really started off as a Kirby clone.
Right, and this is not quite. There's touches of Kirby here, but it's not quite that.
Right, but he got really good really quick.
Yeah. His young mind was absorbing so
like
much.
That inking on the face on the right there, you can kind of see some semi-Kirby-esque touches there.
Yeah. I think he was also trying to experiment with paneling. I think everyone was probably stimulated by Steranko. Who, of course, was drawing from Eisner and Krigstein and other people, but he just amped everything up to a new level. Yeah, I like that. I like that image there quite a bit. So, do you still find time to read much science fiction?
Occasionally. That seems like I spend way too much time on the internet these days, especially on YouTube.
I can start watching YouTube and suddenly realize 3 hours.
I have a love-hate relation. I love it a lot more than I hate it. I hate the amount of time that I spend on it, because it's such a resource for any particular subject you're interested in. You can go on a deep dive on anything.
Yeah.
And then 5 hours later, you're like, oh, yeah, there went my whole day.
Yeah. And for music, it's really great, too. I mean, once you start finding all these old concerts and obscure...
Oh, God, there's so much. Just concert footage alone that's been uploaded to YouTube. When I was in college, one of my suite mates was a Grateful Dead collector.
Mm-hmm.
And he would literally, I mean, every day he would go to the campus post office. Every day, without fail, he would get at least one package, and usually 4 to 5 packages a day, of Grateful Dead bootleg tapes that he had traded with people all over the world via the mail. Most of them would come with some really nice hand-drawn art, with rather intricate graphics and set lists and whatnot. I mean, some of these were professional grade, stuff that you could put on an actual release. But just every day, and he'd have this giant rack that filled up the whole wall, and he'd have, I'm not kidding, thousands of Grateful Dead tapes.
I was always jealous of that and wished I actually liked the Grateful Dead to enjoy that.
Now all that stuff, you can just go to YouTube and
right.
There it is.
I was talking to a high school friend of mine who I've stayed in touch with over the years, and I guess in the 90s, I was sending him all these CDs that I called Radio Damien. I completely forgot about it, where I tried to show him all the latest music I listened to.
Radio Damien.
Now I would just send him YouTube links.
So there was no Dr. Damien like Dr. Demento? Or?
Not like Dr. But he said that I didn't even remember this. I would send him, mixed CDs of whatever latest music I was liking, and then I would send him a long letter explaining why he should be interested in each group.
Yeah.
And now I'm way too lazy and busy watching YouTube to do
Oh,
that.
yeah, I mean, between YouTube and Spotify and Pandora, possibly. I mean, there's just so much music that's available.
Right.
You can't even keep up with it all anymore.
Comic Crack knows Dr. Demento. I assume he's long since passed away, but I don't know.
I'm really not sure. I don't know.
Well, and I know that you love Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
And have seen them
That's
many
my religion.
times. And I make this connection from what you've told me of your musical tastes with what you like in comic book art. Like I feel like the kind of guitarist you like is kind of similar to the kind of illustrator you like. Like the
I never really thought about it that way, but I see where you're coming from.
Kind of
it's
thing.
like the virtuoso
masters of their instrument, and the illustrators are the master of their tools.
That's a very good analogy. I never really thought about that, but that's pretty much spot on.
So you like people who really know their craft and are masters.
Right, but then you can also appreciate somebody who's completely different too. So like Angus Young, I would not consider a virtuoso guitarist.
I would agree, yeah.
But what he does in the context of the band that he's in, not many people can do that.
Yeah. But outside, like if you took his solos just by themselves, they probably wouldn't make much sense. But yeah, in the context, there's some magical alchemy going on there.
Right. Comic Crack says that Dr. Menno's still alive and he's 80 years old.
That's good to know. Only 80 years old. So he probably wasn't that old when I was hearing him as a kid.
Probably in his 50s, I would guess.
Well, I'm 60, so...
Yeah, well, I'm saying he was probably in his 50s when he was doing the majority of the output that most people are familiar with now from Dr. Menno.
Yeah. And of course, there was Wolfman Jack. I was always up... Just because of his name, I was obsessed with him, and his voice was kind of cool.
Yeah, he had his voice was just so unique compared to everybody else.
Now, do you like guitarists outside of the hard rock venue, like Pat Metheny or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I like Pat Metheny. As far as more jazz guys go, I like Pat Metheny and John McLaughlin. Jazz fusion, I really like Alan Holdsworth a lot.
I'm not familiar with him, unfortunately.
Alan Holdsworth is... I'm trying to think of an analogy. He's so different. Alan Holdsworth... I'm going to use the comics as an analogy. Okay. All right, so you have the Fantastic Four, and think of them as analogs of like John McLaughlin, Pat Metheny, Al Di Meola. Alan Holdsworth would be like the Silver Surfer. He was so far ahead of his time back in the 70s. Eddie Van Halen tried to get him more exposure. And he just didn't want, either he didn't want to go that route or he didn't feel that was his career path. But just an amazing guitarist. And I also like acoustic guys too, like Tommy Emmanuel. Are you familiar with him at all?
Oh, sorry. No, I just...
He's an acoustic player. He was studied with Chet Atkins as well. But my goodness. Okay. There's few people on this planet that are as talented at what they do as Tom Emmanuel. He is a monster.
How about Michael Hedges? My wife loves Michael Hedges.
Yeah, Michael Hedges. Think of Tom Emmanuel as Michael Hedges times 5.
Wow.
You really don't hear Michael Hedges mentioned by people under the age of 30, though.
Well, my wife is 50, so...
Right. Gotcha.
I still think of her as young.
I think Michael Hedges passed... Did he pass away at a...
I think he passed away tragically at a young age.
Mid-30s, maybe, something like that?
I can't remember. I think it might have been a heart attack or something like that. I'm not sure.
It's also interesting how people pass away at an earlier age, and that kind of cements their place in the craft that they're in.
True.
They don't go through the development where they get older and they're not doing work as considered as well as they were when they were younger.
Right. They don't get to disappoint people.
Right.
Yeah, like if Stevie Ray Vaughan lived, would his reputation be as big?
I remember the day he died. I was driving across a bridge to go see a friend of mine, and it came on the radio while I was driving across the bridge. He passed away, and I was like, I almost had to stop.
Yeah. I'm trying. There's some guitarists who I loved, and then I saw later in life, and it was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a shame with Stevie too, because that was really after he got sober. You know,
really?
He got himself sober, and he was like going on the right track, and then not long after that, that's when he died in a helicopter crash.
Oh, that sucks.
It could have been Eric Clapton that got on that helicopter.
Oh, was that the?
No. He didn't want to go on it, but they told him, said Eric got on one.
It's amazing that Eric Clapton's still alive.
Yeah, he's come out with some really stupid statements here as well lately.
Well, and he's a good example. I mean, I guess he's still highly respected, but
yeah,
he came out with a lot of lamer music at some point. Well, and I remember a lot of, even though he was having hits, people were not, the people who used to love him and said that Clapton is God were not so enthusiastic anymore.
Right. I think those people may have discovered Richie Blackmore not long after that too.
Yeah.
It's like, Eric Clapton's guy. Well, have you seen this other guy? Have you seen Hendrix? Do you know the story that there's a very famous story about Pete Townsend saw Hendrix in London. Mm-hmm. And not long after that, he told Eric Clapton, said, we're all going to have to give up. This guy is so much better than all the rest of us. It's not even funny. And Eric's like, really? And he went to see him. He's like, oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
I'm not sure what that's. We're talking about Tom Petty there.
Talking about when Tom Petty passed away.
Is that when he passed away in 2018? Is that when he left? I don't know.
I think it was more recent than that.
Yeah, I feel like it was. So I'm not sure what that reference is to.
I don't know either.
But someone like Eric Clapton, I feel like he lost respect, and now he's been around long enough that he sort of regained the respect.
He lost a lot of respect because he made some rather racial comments.
Oh, did he? I didn't even
at one time when he was drunk. But even so, he caught a lot of flack over that. Right. And then here lately, he actually made a song literally just released the other day about being. He thinks COVID restrictions are far too restrictive. Oh, he's the one who's making a lot of statements about that. Yeah, it's not looking good. It's it's not putting him in people's eyes are not gleaming the way they used to. Right. Well, I suppose COVID is, it's not even, it's just a bad topic to get involved in if you're a public figure. That's true. There was another guitarist I was going to ask you about, but now I can't think of it. So, did you like, or do you like Eddie Van Halen, or is he overhyped? Yeah, absolutely. Eddie Van Halen changed. He was after Hendrix. Eddie Van Halen was the next one that came along that literally changed everything. Mm-hmm. He influenced so many people. It's like for rock guitar, there's like pre-Hendrix, there's the Hendrix era, and then there's the Van Halen era. Right. And those two guys alone, just the amount of influence they have is just staggering. That's like the same amount of influence that Jack Kirby had over guys who got into comics. Right. Maybe more so. Well, and big Van Halen fan. The other strange arc is Black Sabbath and Tony Iommi, who were totally looked down upon when I was a teenager. That's true, and I still can't. And now they're kind of like Jack Kirby, also, right? Yeah, I can't believe that Jared has never listened to Black Sabbath. That is weird. That's just like we live in two different worlds. But at the time when I was a teenager, Jared's younger than me, but when I was a teenager, there was no Black Sabbath on the radio. Not even, maybe once or twice I heard Snowblind, and that was about it. I think Black Sabbath is kind of like one of those bands that they've been around long enough now that mainstream rock critics kind of have to like them after a certain time goes by. Well, most of the current mainstream
rock critics would have grown up with Sabbath being obviously important,
Right.
but it just wasn't obvious
I
at
don't
all.
think they were the darlings of critics back then because they were so different.
Yeah, no, they were hated by. They were
Just the subject matter they were singing about was so dark compared to, like the Beatles, which are nice, happy major key songs, and here comes Sabbath.
I think they were just viewed as too stoned to know what they were doing. But obviously they really did know what they were doing.
If you go back and look at their lyrics, I mean, for what you would think coming out of a metal band, from the 70s, it's like their lyrics are actually pretty good.
No, I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying in my memory of the way people viewed them.
I always liked David Lee Roth's comment about music critics. He said the reason that all of them like Elvis Costello is because they all look like him.
Right.
That's Dave for you.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's truth to that.
There is some truth to that.
But
an ant buying a Black Sabbath album. That's pretty cool.
But you couldn't even though Sabbath was selling millions of albums, they couldn't even get played on the radio. I mean, the DJs hated them. Everybody hated them.
Right.
But Rush was the same way for a long time, too.
Love Rush.
Yeah, me too.
One of my top 5 bands of all time. So many people don't like Geddy Lee's voice, and I get that.
Yeah.
But then, you turn around and listen to Axl Rose, I don't get that. Yeah, absolutely love Rush.
Did you see videos where Axl Rose was singing with AC/DC?
I know they exist. I intend.
That made me love Axl Rose. Actually, I always found him irritating, and when he was a AC/DC fan like me, suddenly I liked him.
If I had artistic skills, like if I had Photoshop or something, I would probably make a cartoon of Bon Scott spinning around in his grave at a rather high RPM rate. His voice just annoys me to no end. To me, he sounds like Ethel Merman on a 7-day drunk.
So you're like the rock critics who didn't like Geddy Lee's voice.
They
used to say he sounded like a strangled chicken or something.
Well, there was another band that was somewhat similar to Rush. It was called Budgie. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I'm guilty to say that I only learned about them through Metallica.
Exactly. That's where most people learned about Budgie the first time was the Metallica covers. Bread fan, especially.
Yeah, and I've watched them on old clips of them on YouTube.
His
and they
voice
seem very
is higher than Geddy Lee's.
Yeah. And that's probably why they never got on the radio.
Well, the Budgie was actually a pretty good band. Not bad at all. But if you don't like that really high-pitched male voice, then you're not going to like it.
Right. It's an acquired taste, I suppose.
That's very true. But then there's, some, singers that aren't technically the best singers in the world, but they just certainly fit the music and the band that they're in.
Oh, definitely.
Nobody's going to accuse Tom Waits of being Freddie Mercury anytime soon, but what he does. And
Bon Scott's the same way. I mean, it's the voice that fits that music.
That's very true. Did you know Bon was not their first singer?
I guess I knew they existed as a band before him, but I didn't really.
He was their first singer on a recorded album, but before that, they had 1 or 2 singers before they ever started going to the recording studio.
They're one of both them and Van Halen. I bought not sight unseen. I only saw their covers and had no idea what the music inside was like.
The first album I ever bought was vinyl. Was Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. How's that for an introduction to rock and roll when you're 12?
Your very first
I guess.
Wow. My first was Smoke on the Water. Or what's the album
single?
called? No, the album. I'm trying to
Machine
remember.
Head.
Machine Head, yeah. That was my first vinyl.
That's a good one.
Yeah. My parents hated it so bad, which made me love it so much.
Going back to guitarists again, after Richie Blackmore left, Joe Satriani did a tour with Deep Purple, and they asked him to become a permanent member of the band, and he didn't want to do it. But he was the person that recommended Steve Morse to be the filling guitarist for Richie Blackmore.
Yeah, I liked the Dixie Dregs. I remember I had a number of their albums at some point.
The Dixie Dregs were a big influence on Dream Theater too.
Yeah, I can see the connection there. And doesn't Dream Theater cover some Deep Purple songs?
Yes.
Yeah,
When Mike Portnoy was still their drummer, they had a thing where if they would do multiple dates in the same city, night after night, usually 2 dates in most cases, very rarely I think they ever did 3 in a row. The second night they would cover a classic album.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did Live in Japan by Deep Purple, or Made in Japan,
Made
the
in
live
Japan,
album.
yeah.
Really good live album. They did Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. They did Master Puppets by Metallica.
Oh, interesting.
And you can find you can still get this on video too. They did when they played in Greece. I think it was at Pompeii, if I'm not mistaken. They did The Wall.
Oh.
No, it was in London. It was in London. Can you imagine the cojones you have to do a cover of a Pink Floyd album in the city of London and pull it off and nail it musically?
Are they a band that you've seen in concert?
Yeah, I've seen them multiple times.
And they fit right in with my theory of your sort of master craftsman kind of.
Yeah. I mean, that band, there's so much musical talent in that band, it's not even funny. Oh, we ran Terrence off.
We kept Terrence up late. So
we're talking about comics again instead of music, so we can get him back.
But you are also a guitar player, and I would imagine what the music, the guitarist that you like must make it very intimidating to be a guitar player.
Oh, I can't play like those guys. You wouldn't be able to unless you started off at a very early age and practiced 12 hours a day.
You'd have to make guitar your
like
life.
Those guys did.
Right.
I remember reading an article. There's actually a book that has this too. Steve Vai had a workout, guitar workouts program he made for himself. He would practice 12, 14 hours a day.
Wow.
And sometimes he would practice for up to like 20 hours in a single stretch. Now, granted, that's an easy way to get burned out, especially later on, but if you're going to be a virtuoso at that level, that's what you do at an early age. And
right. You build up that muscle memory, I
when
suppose.
he was 18, he was transcribing things for Frank Zappa.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Can you imagine? Zappa's got some really intricate music that's hard to transcribe. And here you are, an 18-year-old, and Frank says, do this impossible thing, and he does it. I was like, that's a level of talent that just boggles the mind.
Hi, Mr. Gray. I still have 20 minutes before it becomes Monday. For Scott, it already is Monday.
Yeah, it was Monday here a couple hours ago.
So when you've been, I think you've been in bands. Have you been in bands? No. Okay.
It's funny because people will tell you. I think this probably happens with artists too. Like, they see you can do a little bit of something, but you're really good. You should be in a band, and they don't understand. No, I shouldn't be. I'm not at that level yet. You may think I am, but you don't know better. Granted, that never stopped a lot of bands.
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of people start when they can hardly play at all.
Right. I mean, look at the Ramones when they first started.
Yeah.
And look what they became later, although they self-destructed.
You too would claim anyway that they didn't know how to play their instruments when they started. And I'm not saying they're virtuosos or anything.
You see that more in punk than you do in most other genres.
Yeah.
Did you know U2 is the only band, major band, well-known band, that still has all its original members from day one?
That is pretty amazing. And I think they started in high school or something along those lines.
Because you would ask that as a trivia question. The obvious answer up until Dusty Hill died recently, everybody said was ZZ Top, but they had a couple of different members before they ever started recording. But U2 is the only band I know of since day one that's had all the same original members and no lineup changes whatsoever.
It's almost unnatural. I mean, I think it's from the people I've known in bands, it's natural for people to kind of come and go quite a bit before you get the right group.
There's I don't know the artist's name, but he does family trees, like genealogies, where you have these charts. of rock bands and all the guys that played in different rock bands.
Mm-hmm.
The one for Deep Purple alone is ridiculous. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, you know, all roads lead to Rome. All musicians eventually somehow get involved with somebody that had something to do with Deep Purple. It's that 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon kind of thing going on. And those are kind of neat to look at. It's just like it shows you, oh, this guy played, you know, on such and such album. This guy played in this guy's band. You had no idea. It's like, wow. So
Right.
there's a network that everybody knows everybody.
Well, you see that in there's a lot of musicians who've played in every band in LA or something at some point.
Yeah, the older they get, the more bands they've played in.
Right. They keep switching around.
Yeah, especially studio musicians are one thing too, but touring musicians are probably even more so these days.
Yeah, one of the things that I stumbled across on YouTube, now I can't remember the name of the group, it'll come to me later, was this group that's formed by an Australian billionaire. And I guess he can play guitar pretty well, and he hired all these older hair metal band kind of guys to play with him.
I'm surprised I don't recognize that.
So I discovered them on YouTube, and they're still going. At one point, they had John Corabi as their lead vocalist.
Yeah, he did a little stint in Motley Crue for a while.
Right, he did a stint in Motley Crue, and he's done stints in other places, and they had various familiar-sounding guitarists and drummers and stuff.
I have to look that up and see what band it is.
When I remember it, I'll send you a message.
Yeah, after 10 minutes after we get done, you go, oh.
But it amuses me that that this billionaire can, you know, he can basically buy these people who are kind of the mid-level hard rockers who are still around and need a job.
Yeah, I mean, some of those guys aren't making money like they used to. I just saw a video the other day where Eddie Van Halen's guitar tech, when he's later on in his career, not doing very well at all financially. He had to somebody set up a GoFundMe.
Right.
And he had invested all this money in a shop out in, you know, California, doing guitar work and lutherie and things like that. And he ended up losing it all. He ended up almost losing his house.
Wow. Yeah.
Because I didn't think about it, but it makes perfect sense. Because these guys that go on tours as, you know, as tour managers, roadies, techs, what have you, they'll collect a pretty decent amount of money for a certain amount of months, like 6 months out of a year, or what have you, depending on which band it is. But they have to stretch that out until the next tour comes along.
And sometimes the next tour doesn't come along for a while.
Year and a half with no income. It's rough.
Yeah, yeah. And no doubt they don't have insurance and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Huh. Well, I guess it's getting late enough. It's much later for you, but it's getting late enough for me that I can't remember band names or anything like that at this point.
It's like, you know, at 10 minutes after we get done, it'll pop in your brains. Like, I had a conversation at work a few years ago, and we're trying to remember a certain actor's name. It turned out it was Robert Blake. And we're having this conversation. We're talking about different movies and stuff. I was like, I could see his face plain as day, but for the life of me, I could not think of his name.
Yeah.
And the type of job I had, we didn't have internet access while we were actually working, so I had to wait till I got home and looked it up. Oh yeah, it's like been driving me crazy all day, and it was Robert Blake. Ugh, the mind is a terrible thing.
Yes.
Especially when it doesn't work. So how old were you when you started reading science fiction?
I think I was 11. I'm not fuzzy, but I can remember it was an Edgar Rice Burroughs book with a Frazetta cover. It was either The People That Time Forgot or The Land That Time Forgot, and it was an ape carrying away a beautiful pale-skinned woman with no clothes on. And so Edgar Rice Burroughs had this series. I think there were 3 novels total.
The one I remember that was an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel that had an ape-like monster carrying a girl away was called The Mucker.
Yeah, I read The Mucker later on, and that the Frazetta cover, I thought it showed a man with a woman slung over his shoulders. And then I quickly went from Frazetta to things like Asimov. And
Okay.
so my reading kind of led me through the history of American science fiction. I sort of read it in order.
Gotcha. I kind of did a reverse kind of thing. Like I went back later on and then went back to the classics like Asimov and Bradbury and Clark, and the ABCs, as it were. Like, you know.
And I just like comics, I kind of gave up science fiction for a few years, about around 16 to sometime near the end of college. And then I decided I wanted to be a science fiction writer. And you might have heard of the Clarion Writers Workshop. So I went to that.
Absolutely.
And that's where I met Harlan Ellison, because he came to the party at the end and made a very bad impression on me.
Yeah, I know you and I have different opinions about Harlan.
Right. Anyway,
did Octavia Butler ever go to the Clarion?
She did, workshop? And she famously was one of Harlan's students, so she was early, maybe one of the first years there.
Yeah, and he was a big supporter of her as well.
Right. He apparently promoted her career a lot.
He sure did. She's a real good writer, too.
And actually at a science fiction convention, one of the first ones I went to after I decided to be a science fiction writer, I did my most embarrassing thing with not really a celebrity, but have you heard of the writer Gene Wolfe?
Yeah, absolutely.
He wrote Shadow of the Torturer.
Shadow of the Torturer and something about the Sun. I can never
Book of the New Sun. Shadow of the Torturer is the first one.
I actually have a copy of Book of the New Sun.
So he's a real writer's writer, and I was in love with his.
A big Gene Wolfe fan.
Neil Gaiman, yeah, they're good friends, I believe. I think they're close friends, and they've written introductions to each other's books and stuff. I think maybe A Doll's House originally had a Gene Wolfe introduction, or at least one of his early graphic novels did. Yeah,
if you asked me to remember who wrote all the introductions to the Sandman novels, I was like, there's a few. I remember Harlan did the one for the Season of the Mist, just because I have the hardcover of that. And it got in. It's signed by both Neil and Harlan. It's very hard to find now.
So it looks like Paulo started reading science fiction around the same age I did, but I haven't heard of his first book, The Sun is Going to Die by Christian Grenier. Anyway, with Gene Wolfe, I was a huge fan of his writing right at the time where I went to this convention in Illinois where he lives. And I walked into the men's bathroom and there he was urinating.
Yeah.
But I was so excited to see him that I went, Gene, there you are. And he was like, I'm trying to pee, leave me alone.
Yeah, that's kind of.
I realized how dumb that was a few seconds later, and I never got.
Yeah, it's like the last thing you want to do is interrupt somebody at that particular point.
Yes, it was bad.
I remember the first science fiction convention I ever went to. I stumbled across it by accident. I was 13 years old, and it was the very first what was called Technicon, which was they don't have them anymore, but it was a series of conventions they had at Virginia Tech. At the time, I probably lived about 30 miles away from Virginia Tech. I was just visiting for the weekend. I was walking on campus, and there was these signs saying there's a convention at the Student Center, and I thought, this is kind of interesting. Walked in there, didn't have any clue that there were other people like me that liked this kind of thing.
Right.
And I was like a little fish in a big pond all of a sudden. It's like, oh my God, look at all these people. They're into gaming, they're into comics, they're into science fiction and fan. These are my people.
Right.
Kelly Freyas was the art guest of honor.
That's awesome.
That year. That convention probably lasted 25, 30 years, and then it kind of fizzled out. But,
Kelly Freyas was a superstar for a while, but I don't know if current science fiction fans know much about him or not.
Well, I think one of the big reasons they were able to get him is because he also lived in Virginia, too. He lived down in Virginia Beach. Colleen Doran lived very near him, and he was a big influence on her.
Actually, I think my fondest memory is getting to meet Robert Silverberg, because he's also a huge favorite of mine.
Right.
And he actually was the first editor to buy a story by me. So when I went to my first, I guess, I can't remember if it was a Worldcon in Boston or just the big Boston convention. But anyway, I met him there and got to spend some time chatting with him.
It's funny you mentioned that. One thing I noticed, there's a convention in the Boston area that's called Boscone, which has been going on for years
Right.
and years. And I went up there with Charles Vess a couple times when he was an art
Mhm.
guest of honor. And the thing that really struck me, other than the size, which is bigger than the conventions we usually have in this area, it was so much more literary oriented
Yeah.
than conventions we have here, which are a little more media oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, this is neat. There's so many more booksellers here that set up at these conventions. It's like, can we just bring this back home with us? Yeah.
Well, one of the best things about Boston is it's a very bookish town, or best things in my view. I lived in
It
Boston.
ain't the traffic, I can tell you that.
No, it's got some of the worst drivers in the
Good
country.
grief. Well, when we went up there, they were also having the Big Dig at the time, too.
Yeah, that must have made it even more of a mess.
Well, it was worse there than it was in New York City, which surprised me. It was the first time I'd been in that area. And I was like, you hear all these stories about how bad traffic is in New York, and then around the Boston area and Framingham, we're like, these people are nuts, man.
Yeah. I think Boston suffers from being an older city than New York, so there's a lot of...
it's not laid out on a grid like New York.
There's a lot of messy streets, a lot of one-way streets that suddenly change direction
Same
on you.
thing in Baltimore, too.
Yeah, I bet Baltimore.
You have a lot of narrow streets and some one-way streets, and yeah.
I left a negative comment about Silverberg on a YouTube clip where Ellison and Silverberg chat. Really?
I mean, usually people leave.
I might leave a negative comment about Ellison, although I don't recall doing that. But I would. I love Robert Silverberg. I don't think I would leave.
I like them both.
Well, they're both good writers, but I have a special fondness for Robert Silverberg.
I never met Robert. I never met Silverberg. I went to a really cool convention in the early '90s. It was a Famous Monsters convention in Arlington, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. Ray Bradbury was there. Forey Ackerman was there. Ray Harryhausen was there.
Cool. They're all probably friends from childhood.
Yeah, that's kind of like a holy trinity to begin with.
Was Forey the editor of Famous Monsters? I think
yes and no. There was a time period where there was another guy called Ray Ferry, which had bought the rights to FM. There was a big legal snafu about that. There was a lawsuit involved later on before he ended up getting the rights back to that. And I think that may have been slightly before Ferry came into the whole mess there. But gosh, I mean, it's just a murderer's row of talent. Robert Bloch was there. John Landis, Sam Raimi, Yvette Yickers, Zachary, the horror host. William Schallert was there. I could go back and find a guest list, but the guest list was just off the hook. Richard Matheson was there.
Mm-hmm.
I got to speak with Robert Bloch, and I kind of wish now I had known more about his work back then because, again, I would have asked better questions.
Right.
I found out that Catspaw, there's a reference in the original Star Trek series episode Catspaw to the old ones. Now, I asked him, I said, was that an intentional reference to H.P. Lovecraft? He said, no. I was like, well, crap, that blows my theory out of the water. Robert Bloch was a really nice guy.
Yeah, I never met him.
Definitely not, the guy you would have thought looking at him as like, this guy wrote Psycho? Really?
Well, I think horror writers often tend to be very mellow in real life.
Did you ever see any video interviews with Gahan Wilson?
I feel I have, but I
He had that same kind of thing. Boys like, this is Gahan Wilson? You'd expect, the guy that draws these really creepy cartoons and doesn't look anything like what your mind imagines him as. It's kind of funny how you have these preconceived notions of what people may look like based on their work, and it rarely turns out to be the case.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite conventions is called ReaderCon in the Boston area.
Yeah, it's also around Boston. Do you know Warren Lapine, the publisher?
That name sounds really familiar. I wonder if I've
He
met
lives
him.
around this area. He used to live just down the
Uh-huh.
road, but he lives about
I've
30
definitely
miles
heard
away.
the name.
He used to publish Science Fiction Age after its original incarnation, which was at a bigger publishing house.
Oh,
And
I
he
didn't know it
published Weird
continued.
Tales for a while. He still goes to ReaderCon.
Yeah, I feel like I've come across other publications by him
Yeah.
too, but I can't recall which ones.
Yeah, I think he started off as doing KISS, the official KISS Army fan club newsletter
Oh,
magazine way back in the day. So he has some interesting stories to tell about, Gene and Paul. Robert Silver. Oh, I was just looking at Dusty Clam's comment there.
So he's saying, I just looked up Robert Silverberg interview from 8 years ago. You called he and Ellison boring man babies and said you would never have read them if you knew what they were like. I must have mistyped. I might have said that about Ellison, but I wouldn't say that about Silverberg.
Is he talking about your comment or about somebody else's?
I think he's saying it's me.
I don't know. It's hard to tell.
Maybe 8 years ago in a fit of pique, I wrote...
I misread it. I thought it said I left a negative.
I think 8 years ago in a fit of pique, I must have written my real feelings about Harlan Ellison, but I must have misread.
I can see somebody calling him a man baby, but boring is not a word I would use to describe it.
Well, I found him to be dull, but well, maybe I wrote it wrong.
Okay.
Maybe I wrote it as if it sounded like it was both of them. Or maybe I was pissed off at Robert Silverberg at that point too. I don't recall ever.
Larry Niven came to a little local convention a few years ago, and I wanted to see him talk, but the hotel they have it in was so crowded that it was just like, no. I've never gotten mad before in a hotel where I'm trying to get out of the bathroom just to go back into the hallway. That's how crowded it was.
Oh.
And I was like, no, I ended up getting mad going home.
Let me see if maybe this is... I'm now turning on there's a Robert Silverberg interview from 8 years ago. There it is. God, if I heard this show before reading the fiction by these guys, I'd never have read a word they've written. What boring man babies. My God. Maybe I did not like the interview. Someone else wrote back, are you fucking kidding me? Man babies? I do have to say that having spent a lot of time with a lot of writers, most of them are what I would call alpha nerds. I
can see that.
They're very self-obsessed. And I've been in rooms with not famous writers, but just writers who had published a little bit, but, like going to workshops and stuff.
Right.
And everybody in the room is talking about themselves and no one's listening to what anyone's saying. And maybe that's why I didn't succeed as a writer. I am not maybe that kind of alpha nerd.
So you're not always on, so to speak, in full salesman mode.
Right. I'm not in full salesman mode. I'm not trying to get everyone.
And sometimes it's painfully obvious when people are, and it can get to be annoying after a while.
Right. But for a lot of people, sort of relentless self-promotion works, which is always shocking to me because I feel like it's so obvious that it shouldn't work. Well, I don't ever think of
Harlan was a good example of that. He was always...
Yeah, I think Harlan is a good writer, but his reputation is maybe higher than it would have been if he hadn't been such a relentless self-promoter.
It's part of mystique, for lack of a better word, yeah. And that's true. That's true of some other writers too, although probably not as much as in Harlan's case. But,
yeah, like we're having a back and forth conversation, but with a lot of writers, I found it very hard to have a back and forth.
And I'm just wondering if Julie Schwartz would have been as well known as he was if he had never gotten into comics, because earlier he was
He was a big fan before.
Exactly right. But I'm just
Right.
curious if he would have been anywhere near as well known just from the science fiction work that he did in terms of a publishing agent.
Yeah,
versus
maybe.
what he later did in comics.
Maybe he would have gone into science fiction editing if he hadn't gone into comics.
Possibly.
I don't know if he wrote any fiction ever, but I know he was really big in
Not that I
fan
know of.
in the early fandom.
I would still like to see somebody do a comics adaptation straight up of the Lensman series from Doc Smith.
That would make a lot of sense, yeah.
Because a lot of people don't realize it's kind of where the Green Lantern Corps came from.
Mm-hmm. And it's pretty much the starting point for all kind of interstellar kind of science fiction.
Yeah,
leading up to Star Wars.
Empire Foundation,
right? The whole Galactic Empire stuff.
Yeah. True. The last I heard, Ron Howard still had the film rights to it.
Oh, really? It probably would make a better comic book than a film, I would guess.
Possibly. Plus,
the good part of it is kind of this zany energy, and I don't know if that would work in a film. Maybe it worked in a TV show.
A lot of the tropes that came from that, and also this is true of the John Carter movie as well.
Mm-hmm.
People that don't know any better are going to say, well, they're just ripping off Star Wars.
Exactly, yeah.
No, this is where Star Wars got that stuff from.
Yeah, like I remember when they finally adapted Robert Heinlein's Puppet Masters, and it looked like a ripoff of things like what's it called? Invasion of the Body Snatchers and things like that.
Right.
But it was actually written before that,
yeah.
I believe. But anyway, what are you going to do?
Yeah, to me, it's still always funny, too, is when people that know Star Trek but don't yet know Forbidden Planet.
Right.
When they watch Forbidden Planet and they pay close attention, they're like, hey, I've seen that before. Yes, you have.
Yes.
You've seen that in Star Trek. Still love that movie. God,
I love Forbidden Planet is like one of my top science fiction
movies. It still holds up so well. That and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
That I have not rewatched since I was a kid. Huh.
That was the first movie I ever remember watching.
We're talking about the Kirk Douglas movie.
I was 3 years old. My mom was still in college at that point. We were living with my grandparents. This would have been 1971. God, that was 50 years ago. That's scary. So they got their first color TV that night. It was a large Zenith in a giant wooden console. Probably, I don't know, 25, 30 inches, something like that. It was pretty decent size back in the day. And that very night, they showed 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I may have sat 5 feet away from the screen and may have blinked twice during the entire thing.
Yeah, I think I saw it on TV too as a kid.
I have not been the same since. When you're 3 years old and you see what would be considered now a steampunk submarine and a giant squid, that changes you forever.
Yeah. And of course, yes, Forbidden Planet is very obviously based on The Tempest. I don't think they were trying to disguise that at all.
Right.
But it's a Tempest is also one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, and I thought they did a good job of.
But The Tempest never really had a cool robot, though, did it?
That's true, but it had Caliban. So, and I always loved them. Someone, I forgot the name of the director, made a version of The Tempest where everyone's naked. It's called The Books of Prospero.
I didn't know that.
It's a really weird movie, but it made me like
Speaking of weird movies, when I was in honors English class in high school, it might have been 10th grade if I'm not mistaken. Somehow or another, I don't know how this happened, but they wanted to show a film in class, and they were going to show us Caligula.
Mm-hmm.
Until you realize that Caligula is not exactly family friendly.
Oh, right.
By any stretch.
I've seen Caligula, yes.
And we didn't get word of it till later on. I was like, they were going to show us an X-rated movie in English class? That would have been awesome, you know.
Except that Caligula's, if you watch that at the wrong age, I think you would not want to have sex.
Oh yeah,
afterwards.
that's true.
It's
probably
disturbing.
scar you for life.
I always remember there's a scene where they tie off the guy's penis and then make him drink wine until he bursts or dies or something.
Yeah.
Fun stuff.
What could have been, in an English class, and just,
yeah.
But somebody somewhere said, "Hey, wait a minute, no, you can't show that."
So Paulo makes a good point. Relentless promotion is different from being self-absorbed. If you want to be commercially successful, you have to adapt easily to market conditions and selling to different editors. And that is true, and I probably lack that skill. But a lot of the people that I met as I was pursuing becoming a science fiction writer were both self-absorbed and relentlessly like the two kind of went together naturally.
Right.
And they would be self-promoting even when there was no point to it. They just wanted to be the loudest voice in the room.
Not only that, one thing I noticed that's interesting too is science fiction fans of a certain age, less than 20, say, depending on what size city they grow up in. You probably don't get this as much in larger cities, but I've noticed it more in smaller cities. More often than not, they're usually the smartest person in the room at that age in a smaller place until they get in a situation where you have a whole bunch of people that fit that category. Right. And all of a sudden, they're not the big fish in a small pond anymore. They don't like that.
Right.
Sometimes they handle it well, and other times they don't.
And a good number of them lean into a bit of the Asperger's type of personality. And I might myself lean into that a little bit, I suppose. But that doesn't help when they're all in a room together.
Right. Yeah, well, you're talking about like alpha geeks, for lack of a better word. Sometimes they just don't mix well. Sometimes
that's what I mean. They're geeks. They don't have the social skills, but they are the alpha ones, the ones who are really pushing ahead their writing careers and stuff.
Right.
But and I think, I think it may be worse now than it was in the past. You know how like in the world of academic poetry that no one actually reads is amongst the most vicious. The rewards and prizes are small, but they fight over them even more.
Oh, and like some of the poetry slam things get really competitive.
Yeah. And if you and I feel like in modern science fiction, the market has shrunk a lot in terms of writing. It's popular in movies and stuff, but there's a lot of people who want to be science fiction writers and not nearly as many readers as they used to be. And so I think
that's true. Plus, you have so much more audience fragmentation these days as you get compared to pre-internet, especially.
So I think then you get more people sort of fighting over the turf. I mean, not literally.
Not only that, but you have more niche subgenres as well.
Well, there's that too.
And there's even more fighting over that little bit of turf, what actually exists.
Right.
One other thing I've also noticed too, science fiction cover art is not what it used to be.
I don't like it at all.
For lack of a better word today, I'd say it's kind of generic.
It is, and it doesn't. I'll go to the science fiction section of the bookstore, and I won't look at the covers and say, hey, I want to read these.
Right.
I just bounce off of it. Now, that might be my age and, what I'm used to and everything.
Well, it's just something I noticed a few years ago. It's like they're all the style that's in vogue these days. It's just so much of the same thing over and over and over and over. It's like it's nowhere near the variety that you had even in the 80s.
Yeah.
I think where this age, and the way your outlook on things, and like part of it's just they're just not as diverse as they used to be.
I feel like where it began is at one point a really popular genre was what do they call it, like urban fantasy. wizards who are
Charles DeLint's a good example of that.
Well, Charles DeLint's a good forerunner of it, but at some point it became kind of a very generic, to misuse the term, but a very generic part of fantasy fiction, and you would go to the bookstore and most of the books had the same kind of cover on them. And then I feel like the other science fiction books started copying the style of those covers. But I'm not putting down Charles DeLint at all. He's a good writer. I'm thinking of what's the name? I think
he's like the premier example of what is considered to be urban fantasy.
Right. But he was writing it before most people were.
That's true.
And that at some point it was just like a wall of urban fantasy. I think that's gone away a bit. I'm not sure because I don't pay as close attention.
Well, there's a lot of that spread to the young adult market too.
Right.
I think Harry Potter had kind of a influence.
The covers in the young adult market are much better. Like the books that my daughter gets.
Even before that, the covers for just kids' books before the young adult market. Some of those are just fun to look through.
True. Yeah.
You get some really weird looks when you're an adult in Barnes and Noble. Especially, looking like I do, looking at kids' books, people look at you kind of weird. Like, It's a funny story. I remember. Are you familiar with the Ology series of books? Dragonology. Yeah, there was a series of books.
Oh yeah, Dragonology.
Dragonology. There was
I remember those. Yeah.
Well, they came out with an Oceanology one, which was the scheme for that one was kind of like a Jules Verne kind of story.
Oh, cool.
I'm all about anything that has to do with
Jules Verne. 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yeah. So I noticed they have this book in stock at the local Barnes & Noble, and I'm going to get this book. Okay. There was a father and his daughter, and I imagine his daughter probably was about 13, 14, somewhere in that age. And they got there before I did, and they were standing there looking at this book, and it was the only copy of the book the store had, for what seemed to be a ridiculous amount of time. It's probably just a few minutes, but it seemed to me it was like 20 to 30. And I'm sitting here behind them, I'm sure I look like a stalker. I was like, come on, just put the damn book down so I can get my copy and get out of here. And I'm sure if anybody would have looked at me, it's like, what the hell is he doing?
Yes, Paulo, you should definitely tell this story, maybe on the next caravan of now I've forgotten the name of the show you guys are on.
Yes, PhD. Yeah. Cavern of Chaos.
Cavern of Chaos. It's going to the caravan.
I think things are going to get a little interesting with the scheduling because Paulo's working now and I'm going to have to get a job soon. So how schedules are going to work out is going to be kind of up in the air.
Well, I'm glad you're going to get a job so you can buy comics.
You and me both, so I can afford things again.
Yeah, it's always the only thing worse than having a job is not having one.
Yes and no. Not having a job is great, except for the not getting paid for it.
Right. Well, also the stress of feeling like you have to find a job. That's what I really hate.
That's true. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm experiencing now. When I had more money and didn't have that stress, it was great. It's like people talk about they wouldn't know what to do when they retired. I'm like, you guys are crazy.
Yeah.
And that's
I've retired. I can say I've enjoyed it.
That's one of the nice things. It's a blessing and it's a curse to be interested in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
You never get bored unless you're stuck in line someplace, like if you're sitting at the DMV and you can do that electronically now, which is nice. There are thousands and thousands of books I've never read, music I haven't listened to, movies I haven't seen, games I haven't played, meals I haven't cooked, what have you. I mean, I don't see how people get bored. I really don't.
Yeah, me either.
And the problem is just never having enough time and space and money for even 10% of all the stuff I'm interested in.
Right. But some people, they just don't know what to do with themselves. Like my mom.
Very true.
Is
I'll tell you a story.
What to do with retirement.
Shocked me a little bit. I worked in a factory for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a guy there that was working there, and he's passed away now, but he was right at retirement age when I was working there. As a matter of fact, I think he retired shortly after I left. He's from a small town nearby. And I asked him one day, I said, Charlie, what do you do, when you get home at night? And his little answer was nothing.
Wow.
It's kind of a generic answer, but I thought, I'm going to prod and see if he actually means that. All right, well, do you like go places and talk with your wife? He said, no, not really. That's interesting. And my mind starts going now. Well, do you have any hobbies? No. Do you collect anything? No. Do you watch TV? He said, not really. Like, wow, you really don't do anything.
He should not retire.
It turns out I did some, asking. I wasn't like prodding him, but I was kind of like, he had never been farther away from his house that he grew up in more than 100-mile radius.
Wow.
In his entire life, and he was 65 at that point. And my mind is,
that's like a lack of curiosity, or I don't know.
Wow, that's just I don't even know how to respond to that. So when he said nothing, he wasn't kidding.
Well, I think I've always defined myself by my variety of interests and not by my job. So
exactly, I feel the exact same way.
So when I've retired, I still have everything that's me there, because it wasn't part of my job.
I guess I have a bit of OCD about certain things. And I was reading Mike Portnoy's website. He used to be Dream Theater's drummer. And his wording was so, he described me to a T when he's describing himself. He's like, when he gets interested in a subject, he wants to know everything about it. And you will go into a deep dive of researching whatever it may be, that day. It may be King Kong one day. It may be the movie 2001 another day, a couple days after the GAD. It may be Pete Craig, whatever it may be that given day, or however long your interest cycles around. But yeah, like when I get really interested in something, I want to know everything there is to know about it.
Right. There's always more to learn or dive into.
Yeah. It's a good thing I didn't go that way with photography, because boy, that's an expensive rabbit hole to go down that way.
Yeah. Well, I always tell my wife I don't always tell her, but I've mentioned occasionally she should be glad I'm not into collecting cars. Then it would be really.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you could spend some serious money there.
But whatever I'm interested in, I want to go down the rabbit hole. I want to find out the history of comics, the history of science fiction, the history of rock and roll, or just whatever.
Those three things you just mentioned, yeah, that's me to a T. Have you ever seen Jay Leno's car collection?
I've seen photos.
It's ridiculous. It's
and
crazy.
if I let myself be into cars, I'd want to do the same thing. But of course I can't.
Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top has a really large car collection too. It's crazy. Crazy go nuts.
I suppose, maybe I should have become a rock star just so I could collect cars, but I have no musical talents.
I mean, that's what a lot of rock stars spent money on. Sports, very expensive Italian sports cars.
Right. Well, I mean, I can understand the urge,
That's actually how Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen met.
I've heard, but
Sammy Hagar had a Ferrari.
Mechanic or something.
Yeah, and he had a mechanic shop in L.A. And then Eddie had a Lamborghini, and they were both at the same shop. And the mechanic said, "You guys should get together and talk with each other," and they did. So.
I listened to the audiobook of Sammy Hagar's autobiography. So
is that the one that's called Red?
Yes.
Let me ask you a question, because I've heard something very interesting.
It was a while ago, so I don't know if I'll remember everything.
I'd watched a video interview with Sammy where he talked about he had an alien experience. Did he go into that in his autobiography?
I don't recall that. No, I don't think
it seems to me like he had some kind of alien experience where he saw a UFO somewhere and he felt like they were downloading information into his brain.
Maybe the editors told him not to put that in.
But it's interesting that they may not have, because after Barry Windsor Smith published the Opus books, Volume 1 and Volume 2, he wanted to talk about those subjects. And some of the other publishers were like, we're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
I don't care who you are. I wonder if that might have been a contribution to the fact that for a lot of years he really didn't publish much of anything.
That could well be. Yeah, he might have
Paolo is talking
not
about
be
Bugatti.
literally blacklisted, but a lot of editors may have shied
Right.
away from it.
It's not blacklisted. It's just like we're not touching that subject.
I'm just trying to figure out how many kidneys does Paolo have?
To afford a Bugatti, you would need like elephant-sized kidneys, and you need a lot of them. Like
you could sell your children's kidneys.
It's like you would probably put all the African elephants into extinction, and possibly half the Asian ones as well to afford a Bugatti. I don't even want to think about what that costs.
Yeah, see, I don't want to even. I bet if I got into cars, I'd be into the history of them and all the different technology and stuff. And
so would I.
It would be such an expensive rabbit hole. It would be so frustrating because I
don't know if I've mentioned this to you or not, but I've talked about some other places. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, you remember the TV show that came on that's called Black Sheep Squadron that starred Robert Conrad?
I do remember it, yeah.
Okay. So I got into naval aviation history through that show.
Mm-hmm.
There were an awful lot of 7 to 9-year-old kids in my school that knew an awful lot about fighter planes because of that show.
Interesting.
And we would read the same books, and you would go into the town library, and you would have, back in the day, you'd have the card catalog system, but you'd have the little slip in the back that had the name of who checked out the book.
Yeah.
And you could see that, and you knew everybody in the town. You know, it's like, oh, Freddie read this, Patrick read this, Jay, what have you. So all your friends read that same book. And that started a rabbit hole at a very early age of 7, getting into fighter planes and aviation. And I would be the same way if I got into cars.
Yeah, sometime around a similar age, but a different time period because I'm older. Mm-hmm. I was really into, and I bet other kids were too, into World War I airplanes and learning about all the different planes and stuff. I imagine at some point that was something rich people would also do, is collect old airplanes.
Did Snoopy have any influence?
I bet Snoopy had an influence.
I'm wondering. Yeah, have you seen?
And on my trip that I took recently, we went to the Air and Space Museum
in DC.
The one in the suburbs. I forgot the name of the town in Virginia.
Did you go to the annex in?
Maybe it's the annex.
The annex is smaller. The actual museum itself is in DC on the lawn.
It was, I know, and that was closed. And there was one out in the suburbs. Yeah. It had a air traffic control tower.
Yeah, and it's got a partial name that you can't pronounce the guy's last name. It's like the Zelazny.
Right, he was the guy who contributed money to start.
Yeah, that's the annex.
That's smaller. Okay, it had the space shuttle.
Yeah, but it has, which one did it have? Was it Discovery or Columbia? No, it wasn't Columbia.
It can be Columbia because that exploded, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was amazing to actually stand next to a space shuttle. That was enormous. And I could feel that. I didn't want to leave that museum, but my daughter got bored pretty quickly.
If you get to go back, also go. I haven't been to the annex, but I've been to the main one.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I was at the main one, they actually had a Star Trek exhibit there. And since then, they've restored the original filming version of the Enterprise, which is pretty large. It's like 6-7 feet long, something like that. And I watched a video on the restoration of it. It was just amazing how they treated it like a historical artifact, and how much care they used in analyzing the paint that was used for it. I mean, going into scientific detail about it. It's very impressive.
The problem, Paolo, is even if I bought cheap cars that no one wants, which I could see that appealing to me, I would need a warehouse-sized garage.
That's true. You needed space for it. The AMT Pacer.
I lived in Connecticut. That's where I grew up, and I worked on a surveyor's crew. And every morning we would go to this same diner for breakfast before we worked. And one of the people who would come there was the heir to the ball bearings. He inherited the ball bearing business. So his family was wealthy. And so he just had his own garage, and he hired a bunch of mechanics who hung out with him, and
Mhm.
they collected and fixed up cars. That was his whole life. And he was
Nice.
always hanging out at that diner. So he did that. He must have had a giant warehouse type garage just full of cars, and they would
In that same
occasionally.
vein, we're getting back to World War and aviation. Peter Jackson, the film director,
Mhm.
has a little fleet of World War I airplanes that have been restored and refurbished.
Wow.
And Adam Savage from Mythbusters went down to visit them, and they would do mock air battles using the laser light equivalent of like paintball type of system.
Mhm.
How cool would it be for? Well, Adam Savage has got all the neatest toys in the world, anyway. How cool must it be to get to go to New Zealand, visit with Peter Jackson, and then get to fly around in World War I airplanes dogfighting each other?
Wow, that would be amazing.
I'm in the wrong business somewhere.
Yeah. Well, Peter Jackson's in the kind of business with a lot of losers and a few huge winners. But yes, we are both in the wrong business that way.
So if we ever win the lottery and we ever get to go to New Zealand, maybe we can hit Peter up and see if we can see his World War I airplane collection.
I wonder if I read like an Enemy Ace comic when I was really young too, and that might have spurred on that interest.
I did not. I know that for a fact. I became aware of the Enemy Ace much later. I read a lot of war comics when I was a kid. GI Combat, Losers, a lot of Charlton war comics, like Fighting Army, Fighting Navy, Fighting Marine. But I never read any Enemy Ace until much later on.
I'm thinking not learning to drive is much more common in the UK than in the US, where we have long distances.
And I didn't realize it until much later. I noticed how common it is for people in New York City that don't know how to drive.
Well, yes, New York City is the one exception. It's full of people who don't know how to drive. But like I have a friend here in Portland who grew up in the UK, and his wife drives him around.
Right.
And for an American, I would not want someone else to drive me around all the time. But
I've often wondered, because I'd like to see the UK, but I just wonder how odd it would be driving on the other side of the road when you're so used to doing things differently here.
Yeah, I visited the UK, but I haven't tried driving. I am afraid of what.
I just wonder how many Americans get ticketed for driving on the wrong side of the road just by accident because it's
or just get into an accident immediately.
Right, exactly.
And they have very narrow roads there. I don't even.
That's
quite
one of the
figure out
things
how
I didn't like about
maneuver
Baltimore and DC is a lot of the roads get really narrow.
Yeah, in Boston, you mean?
Yeah, Baltimore and DC especially.
DC, okay. I was driving around DC, but I guess I didn't hit the narrow roads. Just when we were there a month ago, I rented a car
several years ago, and there's a guy trying to go down a little one-way road in a Humvee, and he wasn't able to do it.
Yeah. There are actually plenty of roads here in Portland. I don't think you could get through on a Humvee very well.
Right. Paolo brought up that Charles Adams was big into cars. I didn't know that.
Oh, I missed that. Huh. Charles Adams, the Addams Family cartoonist.
I wish there was a comprehensive set of his entire output.
Yeah, me too. Because I was looking for.
I love Charles Adams. Charles Adams and Gahan Wilson and Edward Gorey, those three guys.
Yeah.
I'm big fans of all three.
A lot of Edward Gorey is probably the most popular of those now, so it's easy to find books by him. At least that's what I find.
He has a museum that keeps a lot of his stuff in print as well.
Right.
A lot of the Charles Adams stuff is out of print now.
I think it is. And I was like looking because I wanted to read some Charles Adams with my daughter, and I couldn't. I found one book at the library.
There are a lot of out of print compilations, but they're not complete compilations by any stretch. But I'd like to have a complete, like a box set for something like that.
Well, Paolo didn't have problems switching sides. Probably some people don't and some people do, I would assume. But also, Paolo's probably used to narrow roads in Portugal, I bet. I'm just assuming.
Yeah, a roundabout on the wrong side would be interesting.
Yeah, and they have a lot of roundabouts in the UK.
We have two here in the town that I live in, and it's really interesting. You can tell who's a local and who's not by
Right.
the way you see them approach the roundabout. Like, yeah, you've done this before, and especially college students that are coming there for the first
Hmm.
year, they have no clue. They're like,
Yeah.
it's like there's a reason that you shouldn't be stopped. That's the whole purpose of a roundabout, is so you have continual flow.
Right.
And you get so pissed off at these guys, just let go. Just don't stop being scared. Just go.
But most American cities or towns don't have roundabouts, I
That's
don't
true.
think.
A lot,
I don't
most of them
think
don't.
Portland has any. The town I grew up in had a circle, as we called it, a roundabout.
Yeah, we have two, and I think there's a third one being built on one of those smaller side roads somewhere. I'm a big fan. I actually like roundabouts, but driving on the wrong side would be interesting to say the least.
Yeah. Well, I think in New England, roundabouts are a little more common than the rest of the U.S. But
Well, plus in Europe, you're exposed to a lot more things outside your comfort zone than we are here in the States. Just when you travel, just
when you said outside your comfort zone, for some reason I pictured a nude beach.
that's not what I was
Outside of your
picturing. I mean, we
bathing
have
suit.
them here in the States.
No, we do.
They're not that common, but they exist.
Well, I should probably go to bed soon. But that did remind me, when I was 14, we lived in Switzerland, and during the summer,
Nice.
we went and visited the south of France. And where were we near? Were we near Saint-Tropez? I think we were near Saint-Tropez.
Yeah.
Anyway, my parents and my father's a very conservative Catholic person. We went to the beach and they saw topless women, and they said, okay, let's go further down the beach where there won't be topless women. We went further down the beach and everybody was naked. And they were so freaked out.
Kind of
And
a
I
culture
was
shock,
14. And
Okay.
back then, a 14-year-old didn't see many naked women, just the occasional peek in Playboy.
Can we go back? No. Please? No.
We did stay at the beach for a few hours, and I was in a daze the whole time. Blew my mind.
All the pictures I've seen of Switzerland that's a beautiful place.
Yeah, we lived in Geneva, which is not in the more mountainous part of Switzerland, but it still is a beautiful city. I should go back there someday, I guess, once COVID ends. But yeah, that was a good year for me. I went to an international school, and Geneva is a very civilized place, so at least our perception was it was very safe. So as a 14-year-old, my parents just let me go wherever I wanted.
Were you into comics at that point?
Oh yeah, and that was the hardest part, was being away from American comics for a year.
Well, I was going to ask you, did you visit any shops when you were in Switzerland?
Well, I did, but I was not that. I mean, I was just learning French. That's the French-speaking part of Switzerland.
Gotcha.
So I would try to read Asterix and Tintin, but it's also a very international city, so there were English versions of things. But that's because I didn't have any other comics to read. I bought Will Eisner's The Spirit, and that's where I first learned that. And then I had a friend who was very interested in finding Playboys, so we went around hunting used bookstores for Playboys. And in one of those, we found all these old British Marvel reprints. So that was fun. But I wish I had learned French better. But I was going to the international school. I didn't have to.
Yeah, I would like to be able to read half the books that Earl Grey pulls off his shelf. They're in French.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially the ones done by Francois Skyton.
Right.
Yeah, that haven't been translated in English yet, like that reference book you was talking about a few weeks ago. So I want to see that. I want to see it in English, or at least be able to read it. So I'm going to have to learn French.
Je ne parle pas beaucoup. Monsieur Maurice has asked me to say something in French.
Yeah. Maybe we should get
Je suis très désolé.
You should get an optical scanner so you can scan in the pages and then have it translated into English.
Yes.
Although that would be a lot of work. And finding an optical scanner that big these days is probably going to be expensive.
Well, I wonder if eventually you can take a picture with your phone of some words and it will be able
It would
to
be the equivalent, right?
change the, like
The
just
optical
point.
scanner would just be in a higher resolution than your phone
Right.
picture would probably be.
Maybe it will just translate the text. You can read it on your phone, then look at the next panel and point at that panel.
Yeah, like having like a PDF overlay, lack of a better word, we can like tap on it, see English version, and tap it again and see the French or whatever language it may be. There's our $1 million idea.
Yeah.
Develop a technology where you can read foreign comics that haven't been translated in English yet.
I think the technology exists. It's just a matter of putting it all together and having the willpower to make it happen.
It's like we can rebuild it. But it's going to cost more than $6 million in today's budget.
Yeah, my days of working with engineers are over, but they're a stubborn bunch.
Well, there's a good reason for that.
You can get them to do things eventually with enough. Let's see. Thank you, Monsieur Maurice. Paulo Costa says, when they launched Michel Valiant Season 2 at a racing event in Portugal, I managed to interview Jean Graton's son, Philippe, but I did it in English. I assume these are French people then. I don't know. I don't know the race world.
Paulo, a couple weeks or so ago, he did a live chat with him and Gus and a couple other people, but it's in Portuguese. And I had it bookmarked, and I was getting ready to watch it. It's like, it's not I don't know what he's saying. I can pick out certain words here and there because, I had 3 years of Spanish, so I could recognize.
Right, there's some
a little bit of Portuguese, but not much. But just enough to frustrate you.
I spent 6 weeks in Brazil when I was 24, and I picked up a few Portuguese words for a short while. I do think it's one of the nicer sounding languages, actually. But maybe I don't know the differences between Portuguese in Portugal.
They're similar. They're similar to Spanish, but it's just different enough.
Yeah.
We talked about this in our show the other day, but German is such a harsh sounding language compared to other languages.
Yeah, I can see that.
You hear Italian and it's got a flow to it. You hear Spanish,
right.
It's got a nice flow. Kind of French.
Hit
and then here comes the German one, and it's going to like beat you up in comparison, just sonically.
Yes, sonically.
Very harsh consonants.
But it's apparently the greatest language for philosophy. So if you want to get a PhD in philosophy, you have to learn German.
I can't think of any other subject I would rather less get a PhD in than philosophy.
My sister has a PhD in theology, and she had to
That would be a second.
German,
close second.
Ancient Greek, and ancient Hebrew.
I could study ancient Greek. That would be interesting. Some friends of mine in college had a comparative religion class where they had to learn some Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it because I remember they were coming in, doing their homework and trying to say things and write, more writing really than saying, but learning Hebrew, and it's kind of interesting just watching them filter it,
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if the version my sister had to learn was very different from modern Hebrew. I don't know how.
I see what you mean.
Because she had to read old Hebrew documents.
Right. And just think how different modern English is to what we call Old English.
Right. But she did need to know modern
If
German.
you're not a native speaker to begin with, I'm sure that makes everything more difficult, just trying to interpret a modern version of language versus one from 1,000 years ago or more.
Well, and I extrapolate from that and just assume that German's a very good language for expressing complicated ideas. Anyway, but I can see what you mean about German having kind of a harder sound.
Yeah, it's got very harsh consonants. It's like the Germans are coming to beat up the French. You're talking about World War II? No, we're talking about an English. We're talking about a language competition.
But it may sound different to a native German speaker.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. Absolutely.
And I don't know, Portuguese sounds really nice to me, because I don't really understand it. So I don't know if to a native Portuguese
It's
speaker,
similar
it's a
enough
beautiful
to Spanish
language.
to understand parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it'll be things that are obvious, and other times things that kind of trip you up. Is like, does that really mean what I think it means? And usually it doesn't.
Right. Yeah, I remember a Brazilian I know saying, I can listen to Spanish and understand just enough to get myself into trouble.
Exactly. That's a very good way to put it.
Well, I think I should head to bed, and
Okay.
you can stay up all night, but you do have a job, so maybe you have to start learning how to be a normal human being again.
Oh, I don't have a job yet. I'm going to get one
Oh,
here. Like,
I thought you
soon,
had a
soon.
job on the line, or
I'm hunting at the current time. So.
oh, I see. I'm sorry. I thought you already had one lined up.
So yeah, that's going to be real interesting. Going from having all the time in the world off to having to work
Right.
8 to 10 hours a day or whatever it may be.
Shock to the system.
Depends.
Well,
But
we humans are very
forward into
flexible.
affording comics and things again.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's the catch-22. It's like, well, I don't have the time I used to read them. But then again, I was using all that time to look at stuff on YouTube anyways.
Yeah, when I have had the money to read comics, I've always had less time to read them. Oh, the money to buy
Have you
them.
ever thought about doing a video tour, like a walking tour of the comic shops there in Portland?
I have thought about it. I'm a little
To me,
shy.
that would be interesting.
I feel it's unfair to put people in your videos.
Right. Sure.
So I feel
But
like I
you
need to
could do
ask
it.
the shop owners, can I shoot your
Right.
shop when there's no one here?
Fair enough. To me, it's always just interesting to see visually the aesthetics of how different shops are laid out and how they display things and what they choose to carry.
I did do a video on Floating World, which is the
I'll have to look
most
that up.
artsy-fartsy one. Because I was in there and there was almost no one there,
Mhm.
and it seemed easy to shoot it.
Right. You've got me wanting to visit Portland now because I want to see all these comic shops, and we'll go to Powell's.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd have to.
Well, you would love Powell's, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
you probably have to drag me out of Powell's. But then also my friend Derek, who does the oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. The Monster Kid radio podcast is always talking about all these neat film festivals they have at the Joy Theater in Portland.
The Joy Theater?
Joy, Joy.
Huh. I don't know the theater.
They have like some science fiction related
Joy
showings, and they also have the Lovecraft Film Festival somewhere in that area.
Yeah, they do have quite a bit of film festivals, and they have a huge film world, like international film festival here at some point.
And I've always wanted to see the Pacific Northwest too. So.
Oh, in general, I recommend the whole Pacific Northwest is a fun place to visit.
I've been to Alberta, but I've never been to BC. So I'd like to see Portland, Seattle.
Now, when I first moved here from the East Coast, my first thought was, boy, is the architecture hideous here.
Really?
And now I don't even notice it, but it really stood out to me at the time.
Is it more modern, or is it just different?
Yeah, and it was, yeah. And most of it is, they just slapped up a box, So there's a beautiful mountain and then a hideous building next, in front of it.
Well, that's one of the things I always noticed about Europe is they have their architecture is more interesting.
Yeah.
Although there's some interesting stuff in New York and Chicago, especially.
Yeah.
But
well, and there's some nice architecture, at least in parts of Virginia and all along the East Coast, I would say.
Right.
And so the mix of interesting architecture versus just the ugly utilitarian things.
Right. Well, the one thing I always noticed about Europe
west.
is they have so many more statues than we do. And
Europe has all those.
We have now. We're in the process of getting pulled down because they were Confederate war generals.
Yeah, Europe has a lot better public art, of course. Yeah. And that I think they value that more, and plus they just have
some friends of mine in the band. We used to went to Brussels, and I was watching some home video footage they'd taken, and the architecture there was like, oh wow, this is nice.
Yeah, I mean, if I came from Europe, then the East Coast of the United States would not impress me. But coming from the East Coast to the West Coast, I was a bit at first horrified at how ugly everything was.
Gotcha.
But the landscape's very beautiful.
Had you been to the Japanese garden in Portland yet?
Yes. There's also a Chinese garden. Yeah,
I haven't seen the Chinese one, but subscribed to the Japanese garden on Instagram.
Uh-huh.
The place is gorgeous.
It is. There's lots of nice parks, and like we have this thing called Forest Park, which is the largest park inside the boundary of a city.
Oh, okay.
Because it's basically a forest. Like there's a trail that, I mean, the whole forest isn't this long, but there's a trail that winds a lot. That's 26
it's bigger
miles
than Central
long.
Park?
I believe it is bigger than Central Park. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's literally a forest with a few trails in it.
I don't recall seeing any photographs of it. That's interesting.
I may have
something that big would be.
Yeah. Well, they make a big deal of it here, but maybe it doesn't leak out that much.
Right. It's like I don't know if you ever noticed this, but if you ever watch TV and there's coverage of like a San Antonio Spurs game on TV, you always see the Riverwalk section of San Antonio, but they don't show the rest of the city.
That's all I've ever seen of San Antonio.
Yeah, that's all I've ever seen of it too.
Yeah. I was gonna visit Texas in late October or early November, but now I'm not sure with the COVID thing and Texas being not a good place to be.
What part would you go to if you were going?
Well, I have one of my best friends from college lives in Norman, Oklahoma, and he likes visiting Texas. So I was going to fly to Norman, and we were going to drive down, visit Austin, then San Antonio, then Corpus Christi.
I have got a recommendation by a couple of people, including one that lives in Austin, that there's a really, really good comic shop in Austin. I think it's called Austin Comics and Books or something like that.
I'll have to check.
But I've been told by more than one person said if you ever get to Austin, that's a place you need to go.
Yeah. Well, and the friend I'm going with, he and I are. He's like my biggest blues friend. We go to blues festivals together and stuff.
Oh,
so,
yeah, Austin's the live.
Austin seems like
other than Nashville, it's like the live music capital.
Right. And I've never been there. I've never been anywhere in Texas. So.
Either have I.
But and probably I'd be safe and everything, but I just feel bad kind of spreading COVID bringing it back to my neighborhood. Possibly.
I get it.
So I'll probably put it off now, but I'm really bummed because I've been bummed the entire COVID because I retired, about 8 months before COVID hit, and I was going to do all this traveling.
And it's kind of funny because we have an IMAX format theater here. It used to be an IMAX brand, but then they got bought out by another very small theater chain, and they changed the name of the brand. It's still an IMAX kind of experience, but whatever the brand name is different now. And I've been wanting to go back to it since COVID has kind of calmed down and got to the point where you feel semi-safe going back to movie theater. But since then, they haven't played a damn movie that I want to see.
Wow.
It drives me nuts. It's like, I'd like to see you, go back in there, especially since they put in really nice reclining seats and whatnot. And you can eat, and it's a really nice place. But it's like, where's the movie that I want to see now?
Maybe no one's releasing their good movies at this point.
Well, good for me and good for everybody else. Can we do different things?
Well, there's that too. Yeah. Well, so I did travel. We went to DC and then we went to Connecticut. But during the course of our trip, things were closing down again. It was very discouraging.
Gotcha.
We couldn't go to the main Air and Space Museum.
Yeah. One of these days when I have both money and time at the same time, seems like it's never going to happen. I want to take a tour of like all the comic shops around DC and up basically that urban sprawl area of DC.
Right.
Because there's quite a few up there.
Well, maybe we can hook up someday at a convention and then do a tour of the shops.
Well, I think the problem with that too is like you go to the first place and spend 90% of your money there. And it's like, oh geez, do I go with the other ones or do I just go back home now?
Right. But I assume it's a pretty long haul for you to DC.
4 hours.
4 hours, yeah.
Charlotte's not too bad. Charlotte's about 3 hours, but it's a straight shot down the interstate. The very first time I ever drove in DC, I think I was 18 at the time. Hadn't been to DC before, and hit the Beltway on a Friday at rush hour. And I'm like, what did I get myself into? This is not cool. I don't like this. But now
Yeah.
I'd probably go there. It's
Yeah, no,
DC traffic, which is bad, but it's not Boston bad.
yeah. I rented a car in the DC area and drove around, and we were constantly in traffic jams. It was very dull.
Because they do a lot of construction around that area. But the nice thing is you can go to one of the metro stations and take the metro into DC, which is really nice because
we also did that.
Especially around the capital area, it's also very safe.
Yeah. It's a nice area to walk around and just Yeah, no, the capital area is pretty cool. But about, I don't know, 60% of the museums were closed. And
yeah, the last time I was there, we weren't able to go to the National Art Museum because it was closed then. But just the Smithsonian alone takes a good 2 days just to see it all.
Yeah,
not
when you're with a 13-year-old. That's the problem of going to museums with a 13-year-old. You can't stay in any one very long.
Does she have a attention span that's very long?
No, but I think it's normal for a 13-year-old. Gotcha. She has a long attention span for K-pop and Sims and Minecraft, but
I just mentioned somebody the other day. You familiar with the jazz artist Chick Corea?
Oh yeah.
Would he be considered C-pop now because his name's Korea?
I don't think that would work for her, but
I guess very obscure reference anyways.
I did at one point have her liking AC/DC and bits and pieces of other hard rock, but
that's a whole different world than K-pop. That's it.
Right, but
how old is she now?
Then she moved. She's 13 now. I mean, she doesn't say she dislikes that music, but she doesn't really want to listen to it anymore. She wants her own music, which I don't blame her at all.
That's understandable.
You got to have your own music.
Yeah.
Music as a teenager is part of building your identity in our culture.
Yeah, and plus I came from a very unmusical family too.
Uh-huh.
I was like the mutant that was like really hardcore into music, and the rest of my family was
right.
About 40% of what most other people would usually I consider to be a general music fan. But,
I was the mutant who liked to draw because no one in my family had any interest in that kind of thing.
Do you notice how all kids like to draw, and then after like a certain age, they just kind of don't anymore?
Yeah, I don't know what that's about.
That's interesting. I wonder why that is.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have stayed into drawing if I hadn't discovered comics, because I probably discovered comics right around the age most kids stop being into drawing.
Now, would that have inspired you to draw, or would it have frustrated you that you can't draw as well as the artists you'd like to emulate?
It did not. The very first superhero comic I got was The Avengers, drawn by Neil Adams, and I started imitating Neil Adams right then.
I wish I still had it, but my grandmother saved a Spider-Man comic that I drew when I was 4 or 5 years old.
Oh man,
bums me not to have on lined, just regular lined paper.
Yeah.
3-ring punches.
That would be cool to see.
She saved that and brought it back out when I was like in my 20s. Like, you remember this? I'm like, yeah, I remember that. I didn't know you still had it, but yeah, I remember.
Right.
I don't have it now. I kind of wish I did. Spider-Man up the top and down at the bottom by Scott.
Right. Yeah, by the time I was 12, I remember I was like the only one doing drawing anymore. But that's the way it is, I guess. There must be a developmental reason for that. Well, I'm going to go now. So thank you very much, Scott, for joining me. You're an interesting conversationalist.
I saw the Perry Rhodan books. Like, hey, he's actually on the subject.
And for those who don't know, Scott is on just about every Friday on the Caravan of Chaos, which is either on Howler Mouse's channel or on Jared Osborne's channel. More lately on Jared's, I guess.
Depending on if Tim has to work that weekend or not. Yeah, but our schedule is probably going to get very interesting here soon. So
okay, well,
we'll see how that goes.
Maybe you'll end up on some other show instead.
Maybe. Who knows? Tim has been hounding me for years to do my own videos.
Right.
But I'm like, I would want to have somebody else to talk with about it.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, I can get into some really obscure topics and artists and whatnot. So,
see, you're not enough of one of those alpha geeks.
Well, I think Tim thinks I have more to say than I think that I have to say. He may be right. I don't know.
Right.
But I'd also want to have one of those, like what you had earlier today, one of those over-the-shoulder point of view cameras. So I can lay a book down on a flat surface and show.
Yeah.
Kind of like the kayfabe guys do, where they.
You can, let's see, you can take one of these things and attach a phone to it and get almost the same effect. You can just sort of tilt it way over.
But I'd also need to reorganize my comics room and completely redo the whole room and put a desk in there. So.
Not everyone shoots with their perfect comic book room behind them.
No, but even so, I would just want to have at least a certain minimum beyond the giant conglomerate of stuff that's in there right now.
Right. I mean, I shoot in spaces where you can't see the mess of my comics.
There you go.
But anyway, it's what calls to you if you don't feel the need to do it. I mean, obviously, Tim and I had the urge.
Well, another thing too is I'm not really buying comics on a regular basis right now. I think the only thing I really buy regularly when it comes out is Usagi Ojimbo and if Sergio Aragones does something new.
Well, lots of people talk about their older comics. You can talk about anything.
That's a lot of things. I mean, let me ask you a question. So, other than somebody like yourself or Tim, okay, would you think there would be an audience for like pulling out a concrete series from the late '80s and discussing that?
I think yes.
Okay.
Not a big audience, but
right? Exactly.
But yeah, I mean,
and then so other than like, this is really neat. You should buy this book.
Right. Well, maybe if you're pointing your camera down at it and you're thumbing through it, if you find that you have things to say just from what you're looking at.
Yeah, that's the format I'd like to do is over the camera, over the shoulder kind of point of view thing.
Like I will just open a book and just see what happens.
Right. Well, I mean, that's easy to do with a regular comic, but if you're doing, say, like an artist edition,
that is hard. The artist editions are very hard to film.
You can lay it down on a nice flat desk or table or what have you. It's a whole different ball of wax there.
Yeah, I have a ton of artist editions I've never done videos about because I tried early on. And
which ones do you have?
A ton of Jack Kirby ones.
Okay.
So I think probably every Jack Kirby one they put out.
Okay, that's quite a few, right?
That's a lot right there. Both DC and Marvel Jack Kirby ones. I've got a Gil Kane one of Gil Kane Spider-Man. I've got a John Romita Spider-Man one. I've got 2 Spirit ones.
Nice.
I have a I'm having another brain fart of this Reed Crandall. I've got a Reed Crandall one. Okay. I've got the Prince Valiant one, the Hal Foster Studio
That's one
edition.
I don't have.
And that one's even bigger, so it's even more intimidating to.
I have some original. I'd have to pull them out of another room, which is god awful mess right now. I have some books that are shot in the original size format for Prince Valiant, so they're.
Which is even bigger than the.
Yeah, they're bigger than 17 by 22.
They're like doors or something. Probably.
Yeah, they're the original Sunday page size. So I mean, literally, it's. Those books. I'm over 6 feet tall. Those books come up past my knee.
Yeah, well, I have the same thing with Hal Foster's Tarzan. I think you turned me on to their existence, and I went.
Yeah, but the ones I have they're in a paperback format, so they're not hardcover. They're the ones that were did by Manuscript Press, and there's 3 of them, and they're really nice. But yeah, trying to film something like that without a large surface to lay it down on, unless you could find an easel that would support it.
Yeah. Well, what I did when I did do them is I leaned them against a wall
Mhm.
and I set up my camera on something, maybe something like this on top of a pile of books or something. And then I knelt next to the thing, leaning against the wall. It clumsily turned the pages while talking about it.
Sure. See, I have the Xenozoic by Mark Schultz, Grew,
Oh, nice.
Wally Wood.
Ooh, very
Yeah, the
nice.
Wally Wood one is nice, man.
And that's really hard to get a hold of now, I think.
It is. I was lucky I got the one I did when I did. I want the Rocketeer, but I don't have that.
I didn't know there was a Rocketeer one.
Yeah, that was. I think the Rocketeer was the very first one.
Oh, okay.
I have the Empire Strikes Back that was done by Al Williamson. The Starstruck one that was done by Kaluta.
Oh, cool. I didn't know they had that one either.
I'm missing. I know I've got more than that. And then I have other ones that aren't technically artist editions, but they're basically the same thing. I have
Right.
a John Usagi Jimbo Gallery edition that was done by Dark Horse. The Alien Illustrated that was done, the Ridley Scott Alien movie that was done by
Simonson?
Walt Simonson. Yeah, so I have that one.
Yeah, I have one that's like Thunder Agents, but it's like a portfolio, and you slide the individual pages out.
Yeah, Dark Horse did a couple nice portfolios like that too. There was a Russ Heath portfolio they did, and there was also a Bernie Wrightson portfolio, which is really nice.
I have the Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing one, but I didn't know about that other one.
Speaking of Bernie, do you have the book that's called A Look Back, which is a pretty comprehensive,
no, I don't have that one.
Thick art book of his early career?
No, I don't.
If you can find, I can send you like
a
link if you want to know more about it. That book is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
It's like what I consider the gold standard to compare other art books to. It's just so comprehensive, and it's oversized, but it's not absolute size.
Yeah.
But, it's thick. It's a good 350 pages, maybe. But, if you're a Bernie Wrightson fan, that's the one book to have.
Yeah, I definitely. He stands out, and very influential. Not just on Kelly Jones, but Kelly Jones for sure.
Well, I don't dislike Kelly Jones, but just it struck me one day when I went back and was rereading Sandman, and Kelly was doing some art, and also Sam. It really applied more to Sam Keith's art.
Mm-hmm.
Although Kelly Jones is far more Wrightson-esque. And I got to thinking, he's like the first 7 issues or what have you. What if Bernie Wrightson had drawn this instead of Sam Keith?
Yeah.
And I don't really. It's not a dig at Sam Keith. It's just it's just a mental exercise. Yeah. What if certain artists had drawn this instead? And I'd like to see those drawn. Maybe somewhere in the afterlife, there's a giant library of these books that don't exist, and Bernie drew the first 7 issues of Sandman. So.
Well, Bernie Wrightson did the first King Kull comic.
Yeah.
I'm always wish he had done more Sword and Sorcery too. But.
Yeah, and he did. There's a print book they did. It's called the Conan Grimoire. That has his art as well.
And there's stuff in there by him.
That's kind of expensive to find on the market these days. They're not cheap. Yeah, I wish he had done more Sword and Sorcery stuff too, because what bits he did do that showed up in fanzines and proscenes was pretty good.
Cool. Well, we have now talked nearly 3 hours.
Yeah. I'll talk your ear off if you let me.
But it was a pleasure talking, and hopefully we can do it again. Thank you for being available at absolutely no notice whatsoever.
And was like, I need to get here and talk about Perry Rhodan in a little while.
I'm taking advantage of you while you're still unemployed and can do this.
There you go.
Okay, well, good night, Scott. Good night to everyone who watched. Most people have gone to bed, but
good night.
We still have 3 viewers, so thank you for hanging in there with us. And to anyone who watches this whole thing after the fact, I doubt many people will do that. But now we have 4 viewers. Someone just came on. Good night, Paulo. I guess Paulo stayed on, and perhaps Monsieur Maurice is still there. But good night, everyone.
See you later.
Oh, I have to hit end broadcast. Whoops. Can't just